Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Louisville, Colorado City Council meeting of Tuesday, March the 21st, 2023. So I'm calling the meeting to order, and could we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Maloney,
Here.
Councilmember Lay. Here. Councilmember Most. Here. Councilmember Dickinson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey. Here. Councilmember Hamilton. Here. Councilmember Hefner.
Here.
Thank you. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So the first item of business, hang on a minute. First item of business is Ordinance 1851, Series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code, capping the maximum number of gasoline and automotive service stations located within the city of Louisville. This is the second reading and it's a public hearing. Are there any disclosures on this item? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing and ask for a staff presentation. Welcome, Director.
Good evening, Mayor Maloney, members of the City Council. I'm Rob Zuccaro. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. And I'm going to be presenting on this ordinance proposal. So just a little bit of background. There was a moratorium adopted by the City Council that expires on September 30th of this year, and that was in response, as you all know, to a citizens initiative petition that was submitted to the city that would ban gasoline stations and automobile service stations. Just real quick, we use two different terms in the code. They're basically the same thing, it's just different zone districts. Really, it's a facility that sells motor fuels or gasoline. So we're talking about the same thing, even though we're using two terms. But it was in response to a citizens initiative that was submitted and certified by the city clerk. They are in the portion of that process right now where they're collecting signatures. They could still submit those signatures, and there would be an election on their proposal. That was included in the packet as an attachment. It's a broad ban from new zoning applications. It also bans new building permits from being submitted for gasoline stations. Based on all of this activity that took place at the end of last year, the City Council had a discussion about whether to, how to address this on their work plan. So during the work planning process for 2023, City Council did put an item to address the moratorium issue, but also potentially address an ordinance. So staff did work on an ordinance that's very different than the petition. It does regulate and restrict gasoline stations, but it doesn't create a complete ban. It creates a cap. And there are some provisions in there which I'll go over, which provide some flexibility, but also try to limit gasoline stations. This is due to a recognition that there are health and environmental concerns with gasoline stations, and the possibility that this could also hasten electric vehicle transition as well by limiting gasoline stations. So the provisions of the ordinance are to limit to 6 facilities as the baseline. So right now we have 5 existing facilities within the city. We have a zoning approval for a 6th that hasn't been constructed yet. There's a PUD approval. It would require 1,000-foot spacing between facilities. So here's a map that shows the 5 existing and the 6th approved station and what that 1,000-foot buffer would include. The purpose of the buffer is to ensure that certain areas of the city, they may be served, but we don't necessarily need many gas stations because of the concerns. The city of Broomfield actually has a similar limitation. They have a 1,000-foot buffer that they adopted last year. There was a recognition that there really isn't, the competition with gasoline stations in proximity doesn't necessarily bring down prices just because they're across the street from each other. Certainly competition will help control prices, but having, 2 or 3 within a commercial corner doesn't really achieve that. So the idea is this, limits the impacts, the potential impacts from traffic and any other environmental concerns, but also allows gas stations. So there is an exception provided from the 6th. So we wrote this into the ordinance, understanding that there's certainly environmental concerns. There's greenhouse gas goals for the city, greenhouse gas reduction goals for the city that this could help achieve. But there's also economic development considerations for the city. The city is often looking to recruit retail development. If the city were to have the opportunity to have a large marketplace development, those often come with gasoline stations accessory to those large marketplace stations. So there is an exception that if the city were to receive a zoning application for a marketplace development, which we've defined as over 80,000 square feet, and having an accessory gasoline station either on the same parcel or an adjacent parcel, there can be an exception to the cap of 6 or the 1,000-foot spacing. We put in some additional provisions for expiration. So if gasoline stations are shut down, if they shut down or go out of business, that they would lose their approvals after 12 months. So if they have a PUD or SRU approval and they shut down or they stop operating, they would lose those approvals after 12 months. That's more strict than our underlying code. And then if there's an approved station that hasn't been built through a PUD or SRU, those would automatically expire after 36 months. We have provisions in our code about PUDs basically expiring after 36 months, but this is a little more stringent because it doesn't say the PUD expires, it just says you can't pull building permits and you can get an extension from City Council. So this would automatically void and expire any of those approvals. There's also a provision that would require a minimum number of electric vehicle level 3 fast charging stations for any new gasoline station. That was added on through the Planning Commission hearing process. So we've had some other council committees and boards and commissions review this. The Planning Commission held a public hearing and they're recommending approval. And the record is in the packet, the minutes, a link to the video. They did, again, have a provision to add those level 3 fast charging requirements. So it's based on a minimum of 2 or 20% of the number of pumps being installed. That's more stringent than our underlying EV code. You only have to have level 2, and it's based on the number of parking spaces on any commercial development. So this requires a higher level for gasoline stations. The Sustainability Advisory Board reviewed this as well. There's a letter in the packet from LSAB. They're recommending approval with 2 conditions: to reduce the cap to 5 if that recently approved station isn't actually built, and to eliminate the exception for the 7th station. The Economic Vitality Committee also did review this and took public comment. There's no formal recommendation coming out of EVC. So with that, staff is recommending approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, have any clarifying questions or comments at this point? Yes, Councilor Hefner.
I'm wondering if you can give us examples. Are there other areas where the city limits the total number of a certain kind of business? I think retail marijuana comes to mind, but I'm wondering if there are others you can think of.
From a zoning perspective, I think marijuana is the one that I'm aware of. I'm not really aware of any specific restrictions. I think there's some maybe state restrictions on liquor stores.
There's some state restrictions that I think is 1,200 feet required between liquor stores.
Okay. Thanks.
I had a question. One of the things you talked about, if you could go back to the previous slide. Thank you. So the second to last bullet there, loss of approval of existing facility discontinues use after 12 months. But, one of the things I see with these facilities is I expect they're their use and purpose to change over time. As we see the proliferation of electric vehicles, which we're seeing today, and, you know, I'm one of those people that thinks 20 years from now that hydrogen vehicles will be the prominent vehicle at that time. So, you know, we call them gas stations. If we think of them as filling stations, and, you know, people need to recharge their cars or fill up on hydrogen fuel, would this take that into consideration, that we're really changing the type of fuel, but it's essentially for the same purpose?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix. We don't really have a definition for an EV facility that's exclusively dedicated or primarily dedicated for EV charging. We don't have that definition in our code. I don't think our current definitions of gasoline or automobile service stations contemplate that. I think at some point in the future, the city will probably have to address that with some other zoning regulations. This does talk about, one of the definitions talks about motor fuels of any kind. So I think a hydrogen fuel, this could impact, say, a transition to a hydrogen fuel station.
Yeah, so when I was reading municipal code, because it did say fossil fuels or other fuels.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking for clarification. Does our municipal code cover, if we go to electric charging and hydrogen, if that is still considered to be a use, and we don't get into this technical definition of, well, you're not selling fossil fuels, so therefore it's a discontinuation of use?
Yeah, I think we would have to work on the code to address those issues.
Okay.
I think it's
All right.
there's a lot of gray area in our current code. It's certainly, those things weren't contemplated when it was drafted. I think
30 years ago.
yeah, to make sure that we can, if that's something we want to accommodate in lieu of gasoline stations, we probably need to do some work and create some new provisions for those
Yeah.
types of uses.
Okay, I'm just asking that question because, you know, I think we need to be looking forward. We're a policy-making body, and so what do we expect 10 and 20 years from now? And the map you had up there, if we're just calling them fueling stations, it seems to make sense because they're scattered across the city. So thank you for that. Any other clarifying questions? Yes, Councilor Lay.
Yeah, I had a question just to understand the operation of this ordinance and compare it for just a minute to the language in the initiative. My understanding is that we have a current PUB that's been passed or accepted concerning the Murphy's facility. And there's, let's assume for this purpose that that would have otherwise been built, say, less than 12 months from now, 10 months from now. But let's assume, regardless of what we do on this ordinance, that the initiative goes forward.
Mm-hmm.
Would that prevent that station from proceeding further to, you know, to get the necessary permitting and to build?
So I believe that the initiative does not allow a new building permit to be submitted. So if that initiative were to pass through a vote and then it becomes effective, whatever date that is, if a building permit has not been submitted by that date, then I think potentially that would prohibit the processing of that building permit.
And just a quick follow-up. My understanding, and this is potentially a question for the city attorney, but I think you may be able to answer it because of your general knowledge. As it stands, that neither of these paths, we pass this ordinance tonight as written, if that's what we do, or if the initiative goes forward and is passed, or both, that neither of those would cause a constitutional violation, that would take away somehow the constitutional rights that Murphy's might have in that particular property or land use.
So yeah, that's a very tricky question. I think I would try to answer it generally by saying that the city can regulate uses on a property, they can take away uses on a property, and as long as there's viable uses of the property, you don't get into those takings issues. More specific than that, I'd probably defer to the city attorney, but again, it's very typical for a city to allow more uses or take away uses through their zoning, police powers, and again, you don't get into takings issues unless you're, pretty severely limiting somebody's use of their property. So if there's all kinds of other commercial viable uses, that's typically okay.
Maybe, and this is the question for the city attorney. Currently, as it stands, there is no property right that's attached to that Murphy's station, that further action that we would take right now, tonight, or with the initiative, would take away somehow. Is that right?
So as you know, these questions are very fact dependent. So, I'm reluctant to speculate on facts that are to be developed in the future. The ordinance as presented by staff would not impair any property rights, in my opinion, of the Murphy's application.
And just to clarify, rather not speculate on the initiative at this point.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah. Counselor Dickinson, and then we'll go to Counselor Hamilton.
Yeah, I just had a technical question on the EV requirement of 20, at least two EV spots, 20% of the number of gasoline pumps. Is that when does that kick in? Is it like, are we rounding? So I think if I look at what would be with 13 pumps, they would need 2.6 spots. So would they need a third spot then, or would it wait until 15 and actually gets to 3.0 is 20%? Just trying to figure out when that triggers.
Yeah, so we wrote it to state that it rounds to the nearest whole number. So if it gets up to, 0.5 or above, we're going to round up. Otherwise, we'll round down to the nearest whole number.
So 13 pumps to 17 pumps would be a third parking spot, and then it would take till, I guess, 18 would be 3.6, and so that would just, okay. Thank you.
Counselor Hamilton.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask a clarifying question on the first bullet point here, eliminating the number of existing or approved gasoline automobile service stations. The end, it talks about large single-use retail center. Am I correct in assuming that this would not impact a business that had a large commercial fleet and decided to provide fuels for that commercial fleet on its own property?
I don't think it would, because our definitions that we're regulating include sale of the motor fuel. So if they're just using it for their own business use, I don't think it would impact them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to the first round of public comments. So anybody on Zoom, you can put your hand up. I'm going to start with the cards I have for people in the room, and then we'll go to the people on Zoom. For the second round of comments, we're going to start at Zoom and then go to the people in the room, just to try to be fair. So we're going to start with Eric Lund.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council members, I'm Eric Lund, 901 Main Street here in the great town of Louisville, Colorado, and I represent the Louisville Chamber of Commerce. The Louisville Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors did take an official position, voted unanimously on this position, and as a Chamber of Commerce, we're kind of the voice of business, right? So we have to represent businesses I asked my board members, hey, can anybody be here tonight? But they're all busy. So that's what happens with a lot of business people. They're very, very busy. So therefore, the chamber is here. We wish to urge the council to not pass this ordinance as written. We believe that if the ordinance is passed, it should specifically address the installation of more charging stations, but not limit the number of gas stations, because we believe that the Planning Commission is already there to kind of act as that, potential block in regulating how many gas stations you guys might want to have come in. We also think that rapid charging stations should not only be considered for gas stations, but of course also for parking lots and many other locations around the city, including retail shopping centers like over at McClaskin. There's a lot of places where we could put new charging stations in. If you go over to Boulder, of course, they've got a lot of charging stations right now. They have a lot more electric cars per capita probably. And I think you'll see that starting to spread just by market forces into Louisville. So being solution-oriented, we do recommend that if you're going to do an ordinance, that you focus on charging stations and where they might go, and don't limit the number of gas stations so that you leave your opportunities open for yourselves for future business. And I know you've done some of that with some of the things that have been written in there, but it's a lot better to be able to kind of, I think, work from a position of openness from a business standpoint. We thank the mayor and the council members for their due diligence in reviewing this ordinance. But we just don't believe it's really going to impact the environment, the climate, or our sustainability, and it's therefore, we think, fairly unnecessary and would be viewed as a negative impact with regards to the relationship between the city and local businesses, because, again, it's impeding business instead of trying to work with business to help support a strong community. We did do a poll with all of our membership. Through our newsletter, we had 77.8% of the respondents responded with a no to our poll regarding the question of, do you agree with this ordinance to limit Louisville to 6 gas station facilities? So 77.8% of our responding members said, no, we do not agree with that. We therefore urge the council to vote no on this ordinance and ask you to look for more positive ways to support the business community and to continue to improve our wonderful city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Joshua Cooperman.
Joshua Cooperman. I live at 216 Griffith Street. Just over 2 years ago, in some of my first comments before City Council, I joined several fellow residents in arguing against approval of the 7-Eleven on 96th Street. About 1 month later, the International Energy Agency issued its landmark report, Net Zero by 2050, which laid out pathways for the energy sector to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. All of these pathways call for no new investment in fossil fuel supply. A few months ago, I again joined several fellow residents in arguing against approval of Murphy Express on McCaslin Boulevard. On those 2 occasions, I argued that existing city code is sufficient to block the development of new gasoline stations in Louisville. Evidently, City Council did not agree. So Tiffany Boyd, who joined me on those 2 occasions, and I started a citizens initiative to prohibit new gasoline stations in Louisville. Tonight, I would of course like for City Council to adopt the initiative's ordinance in place of the draft ordinance before you. I appreciate that you may not be willing to adopt the stronger restrictions of the initiative's ordinance, so I proposed a compromise between the 2 ordinances in a letter to you. I will not go into the details in my comments. Now, as I acknowledged at the last EVC meeting, prohibiting new gasoline stations is not a top priority for decarbonizing Louisville. Why? Prohibiting new gasoline stations will not have a very significant effect on greenhouse gas emissions. Rather, prohibiting new gasoline stations is predominantly a preventive measure. If we do not allow new gasoline stations, then we will prevent greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and soil and water pollution. My personal attitude, especially regarding climate change, is to do anything and everything that we can, and to do all of this as best as we can. That is why I comment here so frequently. And from my perspective, prohibiting gasoline stations is easy. We just have to write and adopt an ordinance. We do not, for instance, have to pay thousands of dollars per house to replace gas appliances. Moreover, on a personal note, I would prefer not to come before you again to fight approval of a gasoline station, and I presume that you would prefer that I not come before you again to fight approval of a gasoline station. I view this prohibition of new gasoline stations as a narrow measure restricting one specific type of business. As I argued in my letter, I believe that prohibiting gasoline stations will not adversely affect business in Louisville. Indeed, I believe that not allowing new gasoline stations will be beneficial for business in the long run. So, I ask you to pass a strengthened ordinance limiting gasoline stations in Louisville. Finally, I wish to quote from yesterday's IPCC synthesis report of the 6th assessment. It says, key barriers to adaptation to climate change are limited resources, lack of private sector and citizen engagement, insufficient mobilization of finance, low climate literacy, lack of political commitment, limited research and/or slow and low uptake of adaptation science, and low sense of urgency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have R.J. Harrington.
Good evening, neighbors. R.J. Harrington, 457 East Raintree Court. I would also concur with neighbor Josh that the ordinance needs to be strengthened, that the exemption for a 7th gasoline station as part of a marketplace development, that's got to go away. Got to reduce the cap to 5 in the event that Murphy's is not built. Reduce the cap by 1 each time an existing facility goes out of business. And prohibit any new filling stations in what may or may not happen in what has commonly become known as Red Tail Ridge. Why do I suggest these strengthenings? Because, to quote the IEA, which I have on several occasions in the past myself, any new dollar in additional fossil fuel infrastructure is taking a dollar away not only from renewables, but it's basically another nail in the coffins of our progeny. We know this to be true. We have been faced with a catastrophic climate event here locally. The Marshall Fire is that example. Now, can we point to the fact that this catastrophic climate event that happened in our community, can that be directly tied to a or 6 gas stations? Probably not. However, we are also hearing arguments and can read the record that we ought to let the market decide. Well, if we leave all of our decisions up to the invisible hand of the free market man, it is clear what the market has already decided about our species. The market does not understand that without our species continuing to procure and invest and consume things, the market would not exist. Therefore, the market does not understand that by continuing to invest in additional fossil infrastructure, by continuing to incent new supply to the east and north in the fracking sacrifice zone in which we live, that new gas stations will in fact incent the elimination of our species, thereby eliminating the market. So free market arguments are moot. And finally, I would ask you all to think, basically to Josh's point, why we continue to litigate these climate decisions every time these kinds of policy matters come before Open Space Board, Planning Commission, Louisville Sustainability Advisor, and this dear body. Thanks, neighbors.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jojo Fulmer.
Genius.
Hi, I'm Jojo Fulmar. I live at 1712 Steel Street in Louisville, and I am here representing myself as an individual, not open space. And I want to encourage you all to please pass this ordinance with the conditions that have already been outlined by Josh and RJ, because we need to transition away from fossil fuels in Louisville, and having this to stop new gas stations in Louisville is an essential part of that, because if we build more gas stations, we are thus investing significant amounts of money into fossil fuel infrastructure, and thus making our economy more dependent upon them and making it harder to transition to renewable energy. And additionally, another reason for why the cap should be lowered every time a gas station closes, if it is, is because that will allow us to gradually transition away in a timeline that is generally reflective of what we need to transition, or when we need to transition away. And it also is going to the free market argument. If a gas station closes, it is the free market showing that that gas station is no longer needed. So it makes sense to use that as an opportunity to transition away from fossil fuels. And one final note with the survey results that was brought forward in the first comment, that while it is a thing that should be considered, it is a convenience sample, which is not a representative of the opinions of just the population, since it was just in a newsletter. So that I think the results of that should be taken with a grain of salt at the very least. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Catherine Smith.
Good evening, I'm Catherine Smith. I live in Ward 3. I wanted to put a slightly different frame around the discussion tonight, because the way I'm looking at it is, the question before you is, how much fossil fuels infrastructure is enough? We have a new gas station just opened on 95th, 96th near Dillon, and we have a new gas station that can be built. So looking at the question of need, I've never waited in a line in Louisville for a gas station to fill my car. My research shows that it takes 3,000 to 6,000 people to support a gas station. And from what I can tell, Louisville isn't growing at that kind of rate that it's justified. When you look at national trends in gas stations, they're decreasing. In 1994, there were 202,800 gas stations. And in 2012, there were 156,065 gas stations. The reasons for the decreases are that existing gas stations are adding pumps, and this ordinance would do nothing to stop the existing gas stations from adding pumps if that were needed or necessary. Increased fuel efficiency of vehicles is another reason why gas stations are decreasing. And the supermarkets and the big box stores come in, they offer gas at cheaper prices, and they force out the smaller family-owned gas stations. I am in support of this for climate change reasons, but I wanted to highlight some of the other reasons, the other environmental and sustainability reasons that I am in favor of this ordinance. I am concerned about air quality, water quality, soil quality, and property values. The environmental consequences, the pollution to the air, water, and soil impact human health, and they impact our wildlife. We live in an ozone non-attainment area, and the off-gassing from gas stations adds ozone. So I have listened to each of the other bodies deliberate this matter, and they have focused so much on climate change without recognizing the impacts on human health. And I encourage you to think seriously about that. Asthma and other health conditions are very much impacted by ozone levels.
All right, so your time is up. Thank you very much.
Yes, and may I thank the council for their service?
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Next up is Shira Nathan.
Hi. Whoa. This is my first time doing this. I'm a little terrified, so please forgive me if my voice shakes.
Don't be terrified. Please.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Shira Nathan, and I need a moment. Okay. Public speaking is scary. Okay. Hi, my name is Shira Nathan. I'm a 17-year-old student in Centaurus High School, and I do not live in Louisville, but I care very much about the city. I'm here today because I believe that passing the gas station ordinance is extremely important for the sustainability of not only Louisville, but for our world as a whole. In the wake of the approval of the Willow Oil project in Alaska, oil and gas production is increasing in the United States. According to the recent International Panel on Climate Change report, this increase is not something that we can afford. Louisville should not continue contributing to this problem. As with the speaker from the Chamber of Commerce, I believe that amendments should be made to the ordinance as it stands. However, I disagree about which amendments. Following the logic of letting the market decide, I believe that City Council should adopt the amendment endorsed by Louisville's Sustainability Advisory Board, dictating that if one gas station closes, Louisville should not allow the construction of a new one to take its place. Furthermore, research shows that in order for a gas station to be profitable, it requires a population of 4,000 to 5,000. Somebody else said 3,000 to 6,000. I'm not sure which is correct. Louisville has a population of 2,500 people and a total of 5 gas stations currently. With the addition of the Murphy Express development, the number will move to 6, providing an excess supply for our population. Why then would Louisville need an increasing number? I am currently taking an environmental science class. If you would like, I'd be happy to send the council my notes regarding volatile organic compounds and their environmental impact. But I can summarize them here. Volatile organic compounds, which are emitted in large amounts by gas stations and gas station construction, lead to asthma, respiratory diseases, and an increase in tropospheric ozones, as stated by the speaker before me. According to statistics provided by Tamara Krantz, one new gas station emits the equivalent of all the emissions of the gas-powered lawnmowers in Louisville. For these reasons, and for my strong desire to exist on a livable planet, I encourage you to pass this ordinance and move Louisville towards a more sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job with public speaking. Next up is Tamar Krantz.
Hi, I'm Tamar Krantz, 691 West Street in Louisville, and I have done this before, but I still get nervous when I come up to the microphone too. So I really understand how the last speaker felt. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Planning Commission, but I feel very strongly about this issue, and I feel like I will be sickened by the short-sightedness of installing any new fossil fuel infrastructure in a town that just suffered a climate disaster. I know that there's been a lot said that this isn't going to solve our climate crisis, and we should focus on other priorities. But I would like to see the data that shows that this isn't important. We're not going to solve our climate crisis by a sweeping large action. It's going to be addressed by a series of small actions, and this is a really easy small action that our city can take to reduce fossil fuel infrastructure. I like what Jojo said before me, that if we build more gas stations, we're just making our economy more dependent upon fossil fuel. I think of it this way: allowing one more gas station just means one more underground storage tank that we're going to have to pull up somewhere down the road. I heard the representative from our Chamber of Commerce say that this isn't going to do anything for sustainability, and I heard that repeated several times before. So I just wanted to say that I looked into this a little bit. I pulled the air pollution emission notices for the gas stations that I could find in Louisville and found out that the gas stations actually are really large sources of VOCs in our atmosphere. You guys know that we're in a severe non-attainment area for ozone, and that we have days when we're told not to drive our cars or to carpool when possible because it's unhealthy for us to be living here. And our largest, I'm not going to say our largest source because I haven't pulled the APENs from other industries here in Louisville, but the gas stations seem to be some of the largest stationary sources. Let me just share a little bit of data with you if you don't mind. The King Soopers gas station reported 7.4 tons, and the small gas station on Pine Street reported 0.7 tons of VOC emissions. If you average the gas stations in Louisville, each one emits about 4 tons of VOCs per year. And before you say that that doesn't matter and doesn't make a difference to sustainability or to our public health, compared to other initiatives, that would be the equivalent of taking 300 cars off the road for a year. If you average that they're driving for approximately 14,000 miles, and you use an average emission factor for those cars for vehicles between the years of 2000 and 2022. Okay, sorry about that, but it would also be the equivalent of eliminating all home lawnmowers. So it's a significant impact on our public health, and I hope somebody else will mention the BTEX that's emitted along with that.
Thank you very much. As RJ Harrington said, we're all neighbors, so we want everybody to feel welcome to come up and speak. And so I'm sorry if you feel like we're making you nervous, but that's not the intention of City Council. Even though we're sitting up on the dais, we are neighbors. At the end of the day, we're all neighbors. So next up, we have Sherry Summer.
I want to thank staff for creating this ordinance, and especially I would like to thank Josh Cooperman and Tiffany Boyd for creating the initiative, because this is bringing this discussion about fossil fuel infrastructure to the fore, and something we really need to think about. I would ask that you pass this ordinance, I'm not sure, amended, or that it would at least be passed. But the bigger picture is that we need to have a whole new way of thinking. This ordinance is important as it is, but we need to think differently, because we're not really managing our time very well, as I'm not managing my time very well. I was just watching PBS NewsHour last night, and one of the pieces was, scientists warn that human-induced climate change is warming the planet to a point where it is causing irreversible damage in some parts of the world. And we've heard this so often. Do we become blasé? Are we like, oh yes, that's just going to be on the news? We've had a fire. We're in the middle of a drought. We can barely breathe the air, and yet we are tied to old ways of thinking. We need to break out, and we need to think about what this means. If we were literally on the edge of a cliff, and we would not say, well, how much closer could I get and not fall? And yet I kind of feel like we're doing this as a society. When I went to the EVC meeting, my impression was that this is not a divisive issue at all, actually. The members that spoke, I can't speak to the percentage of members in the poll that they took, but the members who spoke in that meeting, who were the most opposed to this ordinance, also didn't understand large parts of it. They thought they were, and I don't blame them, it's very confusing, we're all confused. There's so much to learn, but people thought, well, this is definitely going to be an initiative. They were confused between an initiative and the ordinance. They thought that it would definitely eliminate gas stations. And so that they were so adamant and also not really quite correct on their facts by a long way, it gives us something to think about. We need to have better communication along with our new thinking. I really like what Mr. Lund said about looking forward, and the mayor about solution-oriented thinking. We need to be thinking about what's good for business. And one thing that's really good for business is they need to keep up with the times. Like, this is coming. Sustainability is coming. Nobody is doing anybody a favor by sticking in the past, even though it's comfortable for now. And so I would like to thank you for your time and listening to all these comments.
Thank you. So I have one more card, and I'm not sure what they've signed up for. So Mike Dabrowski, did you sign up for this item or the next item? Please join us at the podium.
Mike Dabrowski, 601 Pine Street. And this is not my first journey to speak, as you well know. I very much appreciate that Eric spoke on behalf of the chamber members, and he's right on point. Our business owners, managers, the people that are really affected by these kind of decisions don't have the time to be here. They're working 10, 12, 14 hours a day and sometimes 7 days a week. So their voice carries a lot of weight. Eric represents 295 businesses here in Louisville. Even though you see one guy speak, there's a lot of businesses who are putting their faith in his words to this council. So please, please take that into account, that it's not just one guy. It's a lot of people he represents, and I appreciate it. Same with the DBA. Mark spoke on behalf of his constituency, our downtown businesses that are very much affected by all business decisions that this council makes. And there again, he speaks for very, very many. I was disappointed that in the EVC meeting that the EVC did not take a position on this. There were at least 12 business owners there, or speaking on behalf of businesses, and 10 of them, I would say, spoke, and everyone opposed to this. And it wasn't because they were confused, as Sherry implied. They know what they're up to. These are smart business people. So I kind of resent that a bit on Sherry's part, but at the end of the day, we can all get along and move forward. I had a call today, and the optics of this is really kind of interesting to see how far-reaching and what message is sent from Seattle. The gentleman that founded my business with my father 50 years ago, he said, "What in the world's wrong with your city council? Why are they doing this?" I had to explain to him, "You're leveraged into it. This was not by choice. We've got bigger fish to fry. We've got crime. We've got, all kinds of issues that we could take on and do much better justice with the time that we have." But the perception, the optics, is that this is being driven by city council. That's by the national news. How do we want to be perceived out there? How do we want those optics to look as our city council and as a business community? Without our businesses, we wouldn't have all this open space budget. Without our businesses, we wouldn't have this nice rec center. So I would urge these eco-activists that are here today to take that into account. I want to see our environment do well. I'm making actions, proactive moves on my 50-year-old business to update it. For those of you that toiled through my letter, you probably had a chance to cut to the last page, and you'll see my recommendations there. But I think it's a compromise we can all live with.
Thank you, Mike. All right, we have one more, and then we're going to go to the Zoom call. It's John Cowley.
Hello, City Council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I feel very strongly about this issue, mainly instigated by the appearance of the Murphy's filling station. I wasn't paying attention, then all of a sudden we have a new filling station, and it's located at the entrance to Louisville. And I would rather see in that sort of area businesses that draw in traffic, restaurants, clothing stores, places for kids to be active, instead of the eyesore of a filling station across the street from another filling station. And I'd like to reassure the business community that this is not anti-business. No business will have a single problem if we leave things the way they are. And here's the reason. Electric vehicles are growing faster than the population in Louisville. So filling stations are going to see a decreasing customer base, not just flat. And we're actually preventing people who would build future filling stations from making a bad investment. Like, I think it was Sherry that said, we need to look forward. Can you picture 10 years from now, Louisville's going to have at least 50% electric cars? That's pretty much a sure thing. I drive a plug-in Prius. It's 10 years old. I looked today, and in 2022, I bought 13 gallons of gasoline. My little plug-in Prius gets 10 miles on a charge. Most of my trips are around Louisville, and most of them are gasoline-free. So that's what gas stations are facing. And I think if we recognize that and say it's not doing any harm to businesses, in fact, businesses can put up their own charging points right there at the building. That's the future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to the people who are on the Zoom call. First up, we have Tiffany Boyd.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Tiffany Boyd, 550 Grant Avenue. I'd like to begin by thanking Rob Zaccaro and the Louisville staff for coming up with this ordinance. Also like to thank council for their time and also having the political will to take actions on climate change. We need to continue to balance that political will with what's reasonable for our small community. What would not be reasonable is to take this to a special election as an initiative and to spend a lot of money on a special election. We have an ordinance in front of us now that has been approved by the Planning Commission, that have been approved by Louisville Sustainability Advisory Board, that has been approved by staff, and a non-formal vote by the Economic Vitality. So 3 out of 4 are saying let's pass this ordinance. I think that's a pretty strong, resounding vote for it. To address some things that Eric and Mike were talking about, I know that the chamber says that they just don't think it will help with the environment. But then on the other side, we have lots of data, lots of facts about the volatile organic compounds, about the impact on ozone. So just not thinking it's going to help the environment is not the data that is on the other side of the argument. Also, something that we keep hearing that this is going to impede business, but there's no description as to how this would impede business. I would argue that the optics are showing that Louisville is forward thinking, that Louisville is thinking about their future generation, that the optics are showing that our community cares about the future of our town and is making plans accordingly. I would just like to end by echoing some comments in the letter from LSAB that said that this ordinance should be supported with the exception of 2 amendments. If it recently approved the gas station on McCaslin does not come through, so if the Murphy station doesn't come to fruition, then we'd like to reduce the cap to 5. And the other amendment is like to see the exception for a 7th gas station related to the marketplace concept. Overall, I think businesses small and large are key to our community, so it's critical that we consider their feedback as key stakeholders for this very specific and narrow ordinance. LSAB concluded that the economic impact was negligible, perhaps even non-existent compared to the health, safety, and environmental concerns of additional gas stations. So again, thank you so much to the council and to staff for their hard work on this, and I hope you decide to approve this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Cynthia Korn Musselwhite.
Good evening. Hello. Cynthia Korn, Musselwhite, 438 Jefferson Avenue. I live in Ward 3, and I want to thank all of the city council for your service, and especially to Councilperson Harlington and Hefner for stepping into your new roles. It's an important role for our town. So when I think about the role of city council right now, times are changing. We face the Marshall Fire. Any of you who've heard me speak on different matters, I mentioned that first. I know at least 25 families personally who lost everything, and beyond that, you know, those who had to mitigate, those who were renting. So, you know, thinking about recovering from the Marshall Fire, what lens do we look at decisions like this? So our priorities, so that's a climate action. We also live now in, you know, what is the responsibility of the city? Quality air and water. We're so fortunate our water readings and reports come out, and we're just so lucky. You hear about places around the country that don't have that, but we are in an EPA recently reduced level to severe air quality area. And another area is fiscal responsibility, sure, and community trends. I would put that even ahead of fiscal responsibility. Where's the community at? And if you see recently, we don't disagree on much. So proud of the action we've taken around DEI and other things. We sit in Boulder County. When I moved here in 1999, I intentionally moved closer to Boulder than to Denver. And to be part of Boulder County, and Louisville sits as the entrance to the world to Boulder County. So we have to recognize our place. And to the businesses, what got us here? What got us to this place with fossil fuel? I would say an imbalance between all sorts of entities, you know, leaning toward development and fossil fuels over community, over health, over people. And the voters, a lot of the business people that they were saying they represent are not voters in Louisville. You can look at the trends of voting of the voters in Louisville and what we're showing up for, and we're showing up. And it's rare. I don't want to spend my time here tonight, frankly. Y'all are wonderful, but we show up because we care about future generations.
Cynthia, do you have a wrap-up statement? You're actually out of time.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, also for representing our area. And I wanted to just thank you, and please vote in favor of restricting this and sending the right message to current and future generations.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Katie L.
Katie, your showing is unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Katie, it looks like you need to unmute yourself on your end. So Katie, there is a second time we will have public comments, and we will come to you first. Hopefully by then we figured out whatever the issue is, but it does appear you need to be unmuted on your end. So with that, we're going to go to the council questions and discussions. Anybody have questions or discussion items? Mayor Pro Tem Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I have a couple of comments. I am one of the council members that voted in favor of this moratorium and the discussion that we're having tonight. I'm realizing that it's more symbolic then it is effective in limiting any kind of climate impact that the gas stations would provide. When you read the IPCC report that was mentioned, it's requesting or recommending that we limit the production and supply of fossil fuels, not the distribution or the availability for sale of those fuels. The city has been much more effective in all of their climate efforts when we've instituted motivations rather than restrictions or penalties or any negative requirements. I would rather see our time, money, and resources spent on the things that we've already decided that we're going to do. We're going to make our city facilities more environmentally green, more sustainable. We have already made some improvements with our sheltered bike lanes, with just various incentives for encouraging electric vehicles, electric bicycles, walking even, improving our trail system. We're partnering with SWEEP to give incentives on the purchase of bicycles, electric bicycles. I think there are more effective ways to spend, as I said, our time, money, and resources than banning something that has a very minimal effect on climate change.
Thank you. Councilor Dickinson.
My mouse got squirrely and I couldn't get to the mute button. Apologize. Yeah, so I really appreciate Mayor Pro Tem's comments there, and obviously the comments of all the residents. My big note is optics, right? Like, this does seem a lot like optics. We are doing something that environmentalists and business people both say isn't going to have a huge effect. But again, it gets like national media attention to do it, which is interesting, right? Like, it's not going to be that huge of an effect. Why does it get so much attention? It's optics, right? We're basically saying at the city of Louisville that, you know, we are anti gas-powered cars. But I think what we understand is the way to decrease or to help our environment is to decrease the number of gas-powered vehicles, or at least their use, right? To decrease the amount that people are using these vehicles and eventually decrease the number of those vehicles and eventually get to only electric or hydros, Mayor's mentioning. But, you know, what we've heard a little bit tonight is, yeah, but even, you know, the additional gas station is going to create its own off-gassing, its own, you know, from the filling, gases are going to go into the air, and it will pollute more. But I would say if they were to argue the opposite to you, if they were to say, hey, we're adding a gas station, and that means there will be less use on all the other gas stations, which means all their emissions are going to go down. Instead of filling up across the street, they're not going to. And so the emissions at that gas station are going to decrease. You'd be like, no, but they're going to increase at yours. You can't claim that you're reducing the pollution at all the other 5 gas stations by adding a 6th. But the same is true by adding a 6th. We're probably going to get the same amount of gas filled in our town next year. We're not going to suddenly be like a mecca for filling up your gas. And even if we are, that means they're not filling up their gas in Lafayette or Superior. The point is, it's the number of vehicles, not the number of gas stations. That's the issue. Now, with that said, I don't understand. I was very surprised when the 6th gas station came to us. The 5th one didn't surprise me as much because of location on a major, you know, sort of thoroughfare there without another option. This really surprised me and kind of caught me off guard. I'm like, wait, why are they asking for a gas station here? Who wants that? Who's asking for that? Where is the market for that? I don't get it. But I felt at the time that our hands were tied based on the current allowable uses, and so, you know, I was one of the people who let that gas station go through. But I was interested in this idea of like, well, but we don't need a 7th. Like, if you look at the map and you look at where we have gas stations, we have a declining number of gas vehicles, but they're going to be here for a long time. So we need gas stations for the cars that already exist. But why on earth do we need to add more gas stations? What a strange thing that in 2001 we had 4, and now in 2023 we're going to have 6, a 50% increase in the number of gas stations. Like, why? What an odd thing. And from a city planner perspective, it seems odd to be adding gas stations in 2023. So while I don't think avoiding a 7th gas station is going to save the planet, I also don't think adding a 7th gas station makes any sense for the city of Louisville. I don't see how it benefits us in any way. Even the tax revenue that we might see is probably being taken from the one across the street. It's not as if it's just a gain that isn't being taken from other places. And so, similar to what Mayor Pro Tem Fahey said is, we do, it's not, it's a conversation for a different night, honestly, but we do need to be focused more on increasing the walkability, the bikeability of our community, increasing the desire and availability of EV electric vehicles. Those are the things that are going to have a bigger impact. Whether or not we have a 7th gas station isn't going to be the big thing. But I think the optics are important. And I think that our role as policymakers is to say, what direction we're headed in the future. And I think adding a gas station in 2026 or 27 or 2030 is going to feel really odd to me. And if we don't have something in place that gives us the power to say no really clearly, I think we've made a mistake tonight. So that's why I'll be supporting, I think, tonight. I'm excited to hear other comments, both from council and the public again, but I'm supporting this because I think it's the right direction for us to be heading. And I think it's not a major impact on the environment. I think it's not a major impact on the economy, but I think it's the right position to be taking moving forward for the future. And we need to continue to do more impactful things. Let me make sure, look through my notes. I don't want to have to talk the second time. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I appreciate it, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Hefner.
Thank you. I very much appreciate the comments from the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Dickinson. I tend to agree on most fronts that this isn't the highest impact decision we'll make, certainly on a sustainability issue, probably even this year. That being said, the sort of frame I see this through is really more one of land use and appropriate land use. And I think to Councilmember Dickinson's point, what's the appropriate forward-looking number here? I think there are other ways we could have done this. We could have looked at land use in different zone districts, that kind of thing. I think this is one way of doing it. My question before was to try and think through, well, where have we done a numerical limit before? And I actually think marijuana dispensaries are, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's an okay analogy that it's something that we've decided is okay and it serves a certain community need, but at the same time, we don't necessarily want one on every street corner. I think filling stations are the same way. How many do we need? What's an appropriate number? I don't know that I feel strongly as to exactly what the number is, other than it seems like into the future we're going to be doing more EVs. Maybe it'll be hydrogen, maybe it'll be something else, but it's probably not going to be gas. And to a large extent, I hope, as we heard from some of the business speakers tonight, the market takes care of that, and that EVs will be adopted because they're better than internal combustion cars, just like we're not riding horses anymore. In the future, we probably won't be driving gas cars, and so I hope the city has a forward-looking attitude on all of that.
Thank you. Others?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes, Councilor Hamilton.
I have a question to start. I'm sure I'll have more comments later, but my question is, do we, as a council and city, have the ability to provide rules or a timeline around decommissioning a gasoline or automobile service station should it go out of business?
I'll start to try to address that. I think the direct question was, could we? I think we could adopt some regulation. It would be complex. That's not something a city usually does. The state oversees that. I did look up some of the state regulations on underground storage tanks for gasoline, and if they are not, you can abandon the use for up to 12 months and keep them in place, and there's some monitoring that has to take place over that 12-month period. If it's more than 12 months, the state considers it a permanent abandonment, and you have to either remove the tank or there are ways to fill in the tank so that it can stay underground, but that it's mitigated. So they do have a process at the state level so that if you do decommission a gasoline station, either temporarily or permanently, which they define as over 12 months, they have oversight and provisions to remove or fill in the tank with some inert material that they allow. So if the city were to do that, that would be a very big undertaking to do, but I think, we could do it. I'm not aware of any other cities or local jurisdictions that do similar regulations, though.
Just to follow up to that, so wasn't that one of the points that we discussed during your presentation, that if a gas station was not used or I don't know, I don't remember the actual wording you had in that slide, but weren't you sort of addressing that in that point?
Yeah, and so that wasn't really decommissioning or removing the tank. What we put into our ordinance was that you would lose your land use approval. So whether it was an SRU or PUD, that would be
So you'd have to go back
expired
through
and
the
revoked.
approval
Yep.
process. You have to go through an application, planning commission, and city council.
That's correct.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilor Mose?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Councilmember Dickinson for his comments because I agree with him. I don't think that this is going to change the world, but I don't think any single action this council or community takes is going to fix climate change, right? Tamar said this earlier. We're not going to find a solution, that's going to be like sweeping. And we're going to say, okay, we're going to decarbonize the city buildings and that's going to solve climate change. No, the majority of climate impact is going to come from residential and commercial. But I think it's a really good idea for us to decarbonize because it sends a signal and it sends a message and we learn something that we can apply. And I think that when I look at the gas station issue, I look at it in two ways. One, I look at the fact that in 2023, we should not be increasing fossil fuel infrastructure. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense, right? Our state has a plan to be on 100% renewable energy by 2040. The life of a gas tank is 40 years. Like, for us to be endorsing the investment in technology that we know is at the end of its life doesn't really make sense. And to, I think, Councilmember Dickinson's point, which I think is really well taken, we need to be thinking about what's going to benefit our business community, right? And what's going to benefit our business community is making sure we're not allowing investment in infrastructure that isn't going to survive. And a lot of people are making comments, and I appreciate the input from the business community, and I appreciate the Chamber sending out a survey. I think, information's great, but to some extent, the reason we're in the climate crisis we're in is because we've allowed the free market to do what they want. And I'm a business owner. My experience with business, and I consult with businesses, that's what I do, and most businesses, their prime directive is to make money. And that's okay, because that's important. It's part of our economy. It's part of the capitalist system we work in. The reason why we have government as a function in a lot of ways is because if we just let businesses do whatever they want all the time, it would not create healthy, sustainable, whether it's economically, environmentally, whatever, economies that provide what we want as a community. And I appreciate the voice of business, and I also understand that we are elected by residents. And we have an obligation to balance the interests of businesses and residents. And my perspective is when the interests of businesses support the values of the community, support our mission to create to support the well-being of our community again, environmentally, health-wise, financially, then great, I totally embrace business. There are times when business is going to say, hey, we don't like this. But the truth is, it's what the community wants. It's the values that our community purports. And I think in that situation, we have an obligation to represent our voters who elect us to do just this thing. And when I think about this, again, I think about sort of two pieces. One piece is we should be taking whatever incremental steps we can take to not create additional fossil fuel infrastructure. So in a way, it's symbolic. In a way, would it really make sense for more gas stations to come into town? Likely not. But I think it's important for us to say, yes, we believe in a sustainable future, which means we shouldn't be building more fossil fuel infrastructure. And I think, we hear from our young people all the time in the community, and we need to do more than just pay lip service to them. And then the second piece, which I think is really interesting, which I was really disappointed to hear was not discussed really at the sustainability board meeting. In fact, I heard, supposedly expert members of that community say, oh, gas stations aren't going to make a difference. Well, thanks to the research that Tamar Kranz has done, we know that it's pretty clear that there's significant VOC emissions that are not insignificant, right? And the idea that, okay, if we have an extra gas station and we spread the cars out more, that's not going to impact the VOC emissions. I think that's an interesting idea, but I don't see any data on that. Like, I see the data in front of me that says this is the impact, and this is the same impact as if we eliminated every gas-powered lawnmower in town, or if we got 300 cars off the road. That, to me, is data, and it's important. And so maybe that's not climate change on a global level, but that's regional air quality. And I think we have an obligation to consider things like that. And I know, the people on this dais have different positions of where Louisville should be in terms of how progressive we are and how far out in front we are and whether we should be with the pack or at the head of the pack. I mean, I'm, again, very comfortable with being at the head of the pack. I'm very comfortable with our community making a statement that reflects the values of our voters. And when I hear people say, I don't believe it's going to impact the environment without data behind it, I don't think we can use that information to make a decision, because that's somebody's feelings and it's their opinion and everyone's entitled to those. But that isn't necessarily what we should be basing policy on. And, again, I heard the term there, this is going to impede business. We do things to impede business in this town, right? We decide that we don't want too many, as Councilmember Hoffner said, too many pot shops. I don't think we'd welcome an oil refinery into Louisville. In fact, I probably would violate our ordinances. There are many kinds of businesses. I was having an interesting conversation earlier about a sex shop. What would happen if someone wanted to open a sex shop in downtown Louisville? I would think there'd be plenty of people saying, no, we don't want that business here, right? That doesn't reflect our values. That's not part of our community. So I think it's a false argument to say that we don't restrict business. We do restrict business, right? And this is stations are highly regulated already because they have severe environmental impacts. So I don't want to say, oh yeah, we don't want businesses in Louisville. Of course we want businesses in Louisville, and we want people to feel like it's a positive climate for business. However, when it comes to an issue that represents our community values and goes to the health and well-being of not only the people that live in Louisville now, but the future generations, I think it's perfectly fine to take a stance on something that may be more symbolic in terms of climate change, but certainly has impacts in terms of VOC, and say, yeah, we're going to support this. We're going to say, yes, we are moving towards a sustainable future. We are moving towards a renewable energy future where we are not going to support the investment in fossil fuels in Louisville. And I feel very comfortable with that, and I'm going to support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? shall we go back to the second round of public comment? Okay. So we'll go around the second round of public comments. We're going to pick up with Katie Lace on Zoom.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I'm so sorry for the technical issue before,
Well,
but thank you.
Thank you for staying with us and staying on the line. Thank you.
No problem. Well, first I'd just like to thank the council and everyone who has worked on this ordinance. And I feel like my voice might be a little redundant at this point, but I'd like to add it to the chorus saying that we support the ordinance and want to see it pass, both from a climate change perspective, from a public health perspective, due to the wonderful data that's been presented to us by several speakers. I was struck by the comment earlier about representing people who are not here. And as a working mother with 2 kids, I'm aware that I can, with some finagling, get to a city council meeting virtually or sometimes in person, but there are a lot of people who just can't, a lot of families with children who can't show up tonight. And I think, we are not a formal organization, but I think that from my experience, many of us, if not most of us, want to see Louisville take a posture that is forward facing, that recognizes that we are not exempt from this kind of global crisis. And that, as several people have said, this one step isn't going to change everything, but it gives us a posture towards being a leader in sustainability and shows that we are willing to be out front and that we are willing to say that we know that we cannot invest anymore in fossil fuels and their infrastructure. We know that. I think of the report yesterday that came out warning how little time we have. And if we're spending that time in our own community investing in these infrastructures that are only going to make things worse, I think that would be a real mistake. And so I'm grateful that so many people have offered their support of the ordinance. And again, I'm grateful to the council and to you, Mayor, and I will end my comments there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Okay, so we'll go back to the council chambers. Does anybody have additional public comment? RJ, neighbor. Sorry, I called you out on that one.
That's perfectly acceptable, neighbor. RJ Harrington, 457 East Rain Tree Court, saying during second public comment, I'm a business owner. Sustainable Action Consulting, a public benefit corporation. In good standing with the Secretary of State. Does Public Benefit Corporation imbue any tax benefits upon Sustainable Action Consulting? It does not. Is a Public Benefit Corporation a legal entity? It is. It is an S corporation. That S corporation is founded to, yes, make a profit. The public benefit part means that the bylaws and articles of incorporation of Sustainable Action Consulting state that that profit must be in service to and of people and the planet. So this business person says no more fossil fuel infrastructure, period. End of story. IPCC report, suggestions, may say supply. A gas station is not simply distribution. It is also supply. The economics, science of economics, dismal science, you can flip those curves any way you want if you're an economist. And so when I say that a new gas station, that if this ordinance doesn't pass and then we are faced with more applications, however foolish they may be from a market perspective, that will incent supply. It will incent new supply. The frackers will say, wow, there's a new place for our supply to supply internal combustion engines. So that has been the point I've been making for many months now about this issue. So the fact of the matter is that businesses, and although I can't speak for 77% of the Chamber of Commerce, I can speak for a variety of business people with whom I do business and consult for business, help to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure for over 8,000 stations across this country to date. These are the kind of businesses that want to do business in this century. Other businesses with their feet in the past, well, okay, they can stay there. Thank you, neighbors.
Thank you. Tamar, please.
Thanks for giving me the chance to speak twice. I really appreciate that you are looking at data, and I didn't get to say this earlier, but if you go on to the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, they have a website where you can download petroleum release events in Colorado, and I shared this with you in an email, but I'm not sure if it didn't come out in the printed comments that you received. But you can sort by Louisville and see all the petroleum release events that we've had here. And about 14 in the past 30 years have come from gas stations. And in our state, so you can see, so I just wanted to point out that there is data showing that if you put a gas station in Louisville, on average, about one release event will occur every year and a half. And I didn't look into the nature of them, but I looked into a few of them, and it's usually people overflowing their gas tanks or releases at the pumps, or they were leaks that were detected in underground storage tanks. So I wanted just to emphasize that it really actually isn't a very safe industry for our public health, and we do have these release events that are causing contamination to our groundwater. So just wanted to share that that's online if you didn't get a chance to see it in my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, we usually don't comment on public comments, but just for a piece of information, everything that we receive up to 6 p.m. actually is part of the public record, and we actually received your information. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know, because in the packet, the Excel spreadsheet doesn't make it into there. That's what I was referring to.
okay,
Thank you.
Yes, please come up, state your name, and tell us what you'd like to tell us. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, so you were up here before.
It's a really hard name, Kathy Smith.
There you go. Or Catherine Smith, I think is the way you signed it on the...
It's actually Catherine.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But, I was really struck by the conversation here tonight. And to me, the most important points that were made is we're faced with a very large, overwhelming problem. It is easy for us to put our heads in the sand and say, we can't solve the whole big problem. And frankly, there's no single action that you can take that is going to solve the problem that really is before us. But you're presented with the opportunity tonight to take a bite, one bite. We've got a big apple, maybe the world's biggest apple, maybe a pumpkin. I don't know. But let's just take a bite at it tonight. And the other thing I wanted to speak to is a reason why I'm opposed to the exception for the gas station that would be tied to the big box stores. And the way I'm looking at this is I love our community because of its small town character. I like it because we have small businesses. It's important to me that they thrive. I shop at them to keep them. in our community. If we create an exception for the big box store to put in a gas station that almost certainly forces a family-owned business to close, what we are doing is pitting our small businesses and our large businesses against each other. I think as a policy matter, that is the wrong way to go. I cherish our small town character, and I ask you to take action that preserves it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public comments, the second round of public comments, and come to the final round of discussion, City Council. Councilor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm going to be looking at my computer because I have some notes to ensure that I hit the points I want to hit tonight. But I'll first start by thanking all those who showed up in person, online, and for those that you had conversations with who are unable to show up tonight due to a variety of reasons. I appreciate you sharing your viewpoints. And I, like many others in this room, spent numerous hours combing through the packet, reading every email that came my way on this topic, and listening to the viewpoints of residents and businesses. And as I sit up here, I choose to believe that we all, residents and businesses, have a shared goal of creating an economically successful, environmentally sustainable future for our children and future generations. And while we may not all agree on what that exact path forward may look like, I believe the ordinance put forth tonight is an important step in the right direction, and I would like you to please let me take a minute to explain why. The PUD and the SRU expiration language in the proposed ordinance, I believe, is a good compromise to the request for a cap to the number of gas stations in Louisville. Cap, not ban, in the ordinance. It provides the opportunity for a diverse set of businesses, not just those invested in fossil fuel, to enter our local economy. Should a gasoline or automobile service station, close or fail to submit their permit or pull their permit in a timely manner. To me, this is good, not just for our residences, but for our businesses, because it is in the best interest of our community to ensure that commercial areas do not go unoccupied for an extended period of time, as this is a lost opportunity for future businesses that our residents rely on for services and goods, and businesses that our residents rely on to get the tax dollars from for the services we all rely on. So the ordinance is currently written. The proposed limitation, again, not the ban, on the number and distance from my perspective does not punish current gasoline and automobile service station owners. In fact, to me, what this demonstrates is our commitment to current businesses and saying to them, you run a successful business based on the economic demand of your product here in Louisville, you're fine, you're good to go. But what we as Louisville are looking towards in the future and acknowledging is that local, state, and federal sustainable energy and carbon goals may impact the demand for your goods and services in the near future, and therefore the longevity of new gasoline and automobile service stations. I believe that the EV language, again, supports our sustainability goals. Fast charging stations will not only encourage the adoption of EVs, but by making charging more convenient, it will attract those EV owners to your businesses to plug in and charge while they buy your goods and services. So in summary, I would encourage those up on the dais tonight to consider this ordinance a step in the right direction to achieving our sustainability and carbon reduction goals. We don't have time to walk. We must run, and that begins by putting one foot in front of the other. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I just have one question for Rob, or for Director Sakaro. I'm wondering on the, if someone's PUD or special review use is expired and gets denied, that doesn't limit that we can still have 6 gas stations in the city, it just can't be that particular one. Is that right?
Yeah, the way it's written is if one goes out of business and goes away, then another one could go in somewhere else or in the same location if somebody wanted to do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to take the opportunity to say a few things. You know, what the action that we took as a council in the fall by doing a moratorium is really a blunt instrument. And so when we started talking about when would we address this issue, working with the city manager, I said, let's do this as early as we can in the year. Having a moratorium hang over businesses in the city is bad optics, because I heard that word a few times tonight, and so I want to address the word optics. When we legislate, and that's what we're doing with this particular item, we're legislating, if we approve this, it'll be changing our ordinances. And we need to do that very thoughtfully. And when you do it, we need to do it in such a way that it has forethought. You know, it's interesting because, you know, there's been a lot of people talking about EVs. You know, I believe the future is hydrogen, 15 to 20 years out. It's not that far away. You know, it's interesting all the changes I've seen in the city in the last 20 years. And so, you know, I have some concerns about this, and I asked some of those as clarifying questions after the presentation. I don't want to legislate something without understanding the impacts of that. I don't want to have unintended impacts of fuels in the future that we might consider to be more palatable than fossil fuels. And one thing I want to make very clear, all 7 people on the dais or on Zoom for Councilor Dickinson, we all support the sustainability goals of the city. You know, I've been on council, this is my 8th year. During that time, we created a sustainability action plan, a strategic plan and action plan. And, you know, I'm very proud of that. As we look at the action plan and really the goals of that sustainability action plan, they are, I believe they're all achievable, even though some of them are aggressive. But it really is about the difference that we can make in our actions. And if all city councils did the same thing in the state and the country and around the world, we would make a huge difference. We can't solve the climate crisis by what we do, but we can be part of solving the climate crisis. And so, you know, I think we have to be, in my perspective, careful about, you know, some of the things we're saying. I mean, I drive a car that's 15 years old. My wife drives a car that's almost 20 years old. The cars being built today, 90% of which in the county of Boulder are fossil fuel vehicles. They're going to be around for 20 and 30 years. So there's no question that EV, hydrogen, there may be other fuels in the future that will take over that and will change that landscape, but that doesn't mean they're going away. And you know, when the thing came up about the Murphy's gas station, I had the same reaction, Councilor Dickinson. It's like, why would we need another gas station? But you know, we're not in the business of determining, you know, whether or not that's a good business model, whether it's a gas station or a bakery or whatever opens around the city. That is a business owner doing a business plan and believing that's going to be a viable business. So, you know, when I look at this and, you know, we talk about the citizens of Louisville and who's buying the gas, we need to remember that this city has over 12,000 primary jobs in the city, and most of those are not citizens of Louisville. So there is a lot of people using vehicles to move around. Now, with the Transportation Master Plan, we tried to address how can we do a better job of multimodal. The bus rapid transit is a terrific resource. As the Mayor Pro Tem talked about, we have an EV program we'll be discussing in the next several months. So we're looking at all of those kind of things because we really, as a council, want to make a difference. But I wonder if this is really this is structured the right way. And, Director Sakaro, I'm still going back to the language of our current municipal code, 1708-200, where it says, or other fuel motor vehicles. I mean, is that enough to cover us for the EV charging and for hydrogen? And what I don't want to do is to create something that doesn't allow a business owner to transition to what those new fuels are going to be. So I don't want an unintended consequence that I legislate in 2023 and another council in 2033 has to fix. And also 1772-130.
Right, yeah, I think that's a good question, and I don't, as I'm reading it, I don't think that this ordinance would impact the ability to perhaps do a primary business that is EV charging. But I do think that we haven't contemplated other fuels like hydrogen fuel that could be dispensed. I do think that the way the ordinance is written is if somebody wanted to create a new hydrogen fuel station, that this ordinance could prohibit them from doing that if we're at our cap. If somebody wanted to retrofit an existing station, it wouldn't necessarily prohibit that. So if you wanted to replace gasoline with hydrogen, that would probably be possible.
Yeah, I mean, so for my colleagues on the dais, I mean, technically that's an issue for me because that would mean we would have to legislate something else, or we would have to ask that this ordinance also change that, and I'm not going to ask you to do that on the fly. So,
do you have a proposal, Mr. Mayor, as far as how you want to accomplish that?
No, because I resist defining that on the dais for something that I cannot come up with language for an ordinance to cover that on the fly.
I mean, in terms of further process, assuming we don't do it right here.
Well, I think it's important for us to deal with this issue tonight, but I don't think this idea should get lost. So I'm not sure how to marry those two ideas. I already put the director on the spot asking this question, and I appreciate your candor. But when you legislate something that's already in code and not know, I mean, because this will change over time. And,
Mayor?
Councilor Dickinson?
Sorry, I was just going to say that, I think if hydrogen power comes to vehicles, that's not next year, and it's going to be a huge deal and probably an appropriate topic to make new rules around an entire new technology and fuel source for vehicles. I think it's worth that future council's time to say, whoa, okay, well, this is really interesting. What do we want to do about the fact that there's a new power source for vehicles that is going to potentially replace, petrol. So I don't think it's hugely problematic to kick this can down the road to when it actually happens. For us to create that in 2023 when it's not even an option, I think it's actually maybe, I mean, we might be missing. It might not be hydrogen. It might be something else. So I think to try to make policy in 2023 about something that's in the future would be difficult anyway. And I wouldn't feel bad for putting that on that council. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Councilor Most.
Yeah, I appreciate what Councilor Dickinson said. EVs and electric vehicles are real. They're happening now. Their sales are increasing every year. They're on a CAGR of 23 to 25%. We know that's reality. We know that fossil fuel-based, what's the word I'm looking for? propulsion. Is that a word for automobiles? Is that the wrong word? You know, we know that that is coming to the end of its life, and I appreciate you saying that there are people with cars they're going to have for a long time, and I think Council Member Hamilton has said this, and I think I talked about this at one point, which is we have to make sure we're not eliminating all gas stations at a time when we have particularly low and moderate income people, not suggesting you are, but that are going to rely on gas probably more likely than people who have more means. So I think there's a balance to strike. But I would agree that, you know, I think that we could take up hydrogen fuel in 2025, and I think we'd be okay. I don't think we have, I appreciate your anticipation and trying to structure something. But again, and as you all know this, my colleagues know this, like I'm from an industry where we are constantly having change, and it's fine to create something, to create a standard, and understand that 2 or 3 years down the line, you're going to have to reevaluate that standard and make changes. And I think, given what I think we're going to see a lot of acceleration in the next decade or two around different fuel sources, and I don't think we know what it's going to be. So I'm comfortable with, I think, the approach that Councilmember Dickinson suggested, you know, that I think we could do this now, take an incremental step, understanding every step we take is going to be incremental. And we may go down one direction and then find out that, you know, we have to change it. But, you know, my personal feeling is, you know, I appreciate your perspective in trying to say we should be building for the future in our community. And I also feel like there are certain times when we're going to have to be a little more flexible because we're dealing with emerging technology that we don't completely understand where it's going.
So just to be clear, I'm not suggesting I know what the fuel is going to be in 20 years. You know, Toyota is spending a lot of money on hydrogen, so I'm using that as an example. What I'm concerned about is that the municipal code we have today probably needs to be more general, that allows for a transition. We don't have to know what it is, but you know, we're asking the planning staff to look at the municipal code and look at an application, and none of us are probably going to be here in 10 or 20 years. And so, yeah, I guess we can kick the can down the road. I'm just pointing it out as we need to be careful when we legislate that we understand unintended consequences, and that's a potential one. Other comments, motions, Councilor Lay?
I guess first of all, I wanted to say thank you to staff, to my fellow council members, to the people who've worked on all aspects of this for some months and have put together some very, very thoughtful comments. I, too, read emails and the packets and a very, very fulsome discussion around the topic. There's still issues, I think, that are unclear, but this is where we always are. We're always at a point where we don't know exactly what's going to happen when we make a decision. But I really appreciate the chance to have to delay this or the initial decision on this ordinance until we had a chance on the Economic Vitality Committee to get input from the business community and others, and to get some pretty interesting discussions back and forth. I found that particularly useful because there were aspects of both the ordinance and the initiative that I hadn't really thought about, and there were views that were pretty nuanced on both sides, and some pretty interesting points that were brought out. And I think I was pleased that we were able to do it in a way that wasn't as adversarial as sometimes public hearings can be. Public hearings can be adversarial and yet civil. I didn't mean that, but it's good to have interchange. And in fact, as I understand it, There was even a beer that was bought by one person of another afterward that were on competing sides of the issue or different views of the issue. And I thought, wow, that two people after that could go get a beer together and talk. That's exactly what we ought to be encouraging. So anyway, on that, I think it's important. I think at the same time, what I would say about the process that I really am not happy with, and this kind of, I don't want to forget this piece, is the way that this came up initially was that there was an initiative filed, and as I recall, it was the same day that council met, and the issue came up in the course of the very end of the meeting, talking about kind of how maybe to handle this in the future. And it went from there to directing staff to come back with a moratorium, and not just that, that it come back on an emergency basis, which means one public hearing, not two. And all of that happened really at the tail end of a meeting, and I voted against it at that time, and I believe the Mayor Pro Tem did too. I don't know if anybody else did, but just on procedural grounds, it was the wrong thing to do at that time. Wrong way to have that issue be vetted, and I think while the point of regulating, I think, is good to put in this council's lap, I think we got to do better in our legislating than that. But to the point that we've had here, I've been listening to all of these comments and taking pretty careful notes because it's a complicated issue. I think that what I learned earlier was that everyone wants to have a vibrant economy and a healthy, safe community. And that's a variation, I think, of what Councilmember Hamilton said. And I do appreciate some materials that were provided about VOCs, and that which I encouraged at our meeting to be submitted that way, and I appreciate all of that. And there is certainly, adverse. I think it's, some adverse impact of VOCs as a result of new or additional gas stations. And the thing that occurs to me is that we've got many different values to balance here. There is what our citizens want. There is an issue of how we manage our market forces and whether we intervene in that. There's issues around whether we ought to pick winners and losers on certain kinds of provisions. But what I think is really impressive about the work that staff did on this is I think a huge amount of work went into this ordinance. And I'm very appreciative of that. I think the idea of not eliminating gas stations is pretty important. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the pressure that is applied to, the current holders of the PUD. Means that there's going to be a decision or not on that. And this is a very, very difficult, this is a difficult issue for me. I think what I really would encourage in the future is, this is something that I would encourage the initiators and others to think about, is coming to council, because council is the best body, I think, in which to do this. Why? Because it's a good, we can tweak and we can push things around, and we don't come up with a, what has to be, by the initiative process, a pretty solid and unchanging document. But I think on balance, I'm very slightly in favor of doing it as opposed to not. I'm not interested in changing that ordinance unless somebody can make suggestions that make it stronger than it is. But weakening it further, I think, is a mistake. So that's kind of where I am.
Director Sakaro, can I ask you another question? So looking at page 2 of 4 of the ordinance, so that's section 1716-340, paragraph B. We, upon occasion, we renew PUDs. And this says council approval. So is it possible that there could be another approval within the 36 months that extends that?
For something that's already approved, could you extend it before it expires?
Right.
I
I mean, that is something that council has done since I've been on council.
Extending it before it expires. Yeah, I think an applicant will come to council before the expiration date and then ask for an extension.
So that would.
And it usually extends from the expiration date, 1 to 3 years.
Right, so,
Yeah.
but that would still apply in this case.
So in this case, the way it's written, that is not the intent. So a PUD for a normal commercial property, you could extend. This one would be considered voided, and they could do a new PUD. There's nothing that prohibits a new PUD from coming through, but it's not an extension
But if we
technically.
approve this ordinance, then I guess there would still be an available gas station slot they could apply for. What we're doing is we're treating this one differently than we do normal renewals.
Yeah, very slightly differently, but
Yeah.
yes, it'd be different.
Okay. Any discussion or motions?
Your motion, if you're
Councilor
ready.
Hefner?
I'd move the approval of ordinance number 1851, series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code, capping the maximum number of gasoline and automobile service stations located within the city of Louisville.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right.
Sorry, Barb.
I'm going to close the public hearing. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Mayor Maloney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner,
Yes.
Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton,
Yes.
Councilmember Most.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. So it passes unanimously, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. You just don't want to waste it.
You can't see me over there.
Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, so this is the Louisville City Council meeting, Tuesday, March the 21st. We're resuming at 8:10. We're going to have a discussion, direction, changes to boards and commissions. So the staff will give a presentation, and we'll have some public comments, and then we'll have a discussion about potential changes, and with the idea that council will take those thoughts and directions and come back for a further discussion in May, something like that. So, thank you. So, City Clerk Muth.
Good evening, everyone. On your 2023 work plan is a chance to review all city boards and commissions to look for areas you might want to do some changes. You have 14 boards and commissions, 5 are required in the Home Rule Charter, 9 are advisory boards that can be changed, consolidated, or sunset as the council sees fit. In your packet, you have a description of what each board and commission does, as well as the legislative authority under which they operate, in case you had any questions for that. You could combine boards, you could sunset boards, you could change duties of boards. All of that is entirely up to you guys. Additional things you could consider is reducing the size of boards, reducing meeting frequency. All of that is at your discretion. So that's kind of one half of the conversation. The other half of the conversation that you've discussed has been changes to the annual appointment process. So you could review applications without names, you could decide on term limits, you could balance the boards based on gender, ethnicity, all of those types of things, again, are at your discretion. This evening, staff has 3 questions for you. One is, are there boards you're interested in consolidating, sunsetting, or changing the duties of? Or that's one question. The second is, are there changes to board duties you'd like to see? And the third question is, are there changes to the appointment process you guys would like to see? If you can kind of answer those questions in some vague fashion tonight for staff, then we will go back and look at what it would take to get us from where we are to what you guys are interested in doing. So that would either be changes to processes and in some cases changes to legislation possibly. So you guys have the conversation, tell us what you're interested in, and I will bring you back how we would get there if that's something you want to do at a later date.
Thank you. So you didn't have to write those questions down. They're in the staff packet on page 3, which is page 84 of the whole packet. But first we'll start off with public comment. And so first we'll have Susan.
Thank you. I'm Susan McEachern, 799 Aspen Way in Louisville, and I'm a member of the Open Space Advisory Board, but I'm here speaking as an individual citizen. I have been on the board for just 1 year, so I'm still in learning mode with it, but I have found it to be a really passionate, engaged, and very knowledgeable board. And I would just like to speak to the idea of term limits. I certainly understand the value of bringing new ideas and new approaches and new knowledge into every kind of board. But I also have really seen the value of having long-standing board members. It's been an incredible value to me to be mentored by those who have been on the board for a long time, who understand the history of the issues that we're continuing to deal with. You know, there are issues of great importance that have been before the board for 10 years. And to have people have to sunset off of boards who have been involved with those really important issues, I think would be a real detriment both to the board and to the city. So I would like to propose that there be kind of a combination of 2 approaches to thinking about term limits. One is to extend your idea of an 8-year term limit to, say, 12 years, so that you really can keep people on the board who bring a lot of knowledge and background on particular issues and can provide those mentoring processes. And then also have new people, fresh people come in on a regular basis. And I think one way to make that happen is on the selection process to really bring in the boards to that process, both for new members and renewing members. There are cases where members want to renew, but they have not been very active in the board. And so I think that often it's the other board members who have that knowledge about who is being a productive, valuable member of a board. I'm not saying that they should have the nay-say approach, but that they should be brought into the conversation. And also for new board members, I think that existing board members will often have valuable feedback about who would bring the best kind of energy and experience to a board. And I would also just like to say that one thing I hope you'll think about that I witnessed as a new board member is that there hasn't been the level of communication between the council and at least our board that I feel would be most productive. Councilmember Fay has been a wonderful contact. She comes to many of our meetings and is a great resource and communicates a lot of our concerns. But I feel that there might need to be a little more of a full board engagement with the important issues that the boards raise. So thank you for taking those into consideration.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments? Sherry?
Sherry Summer, 910 South Palisade Court. I also wanted to speak about term limits, and I would like to advocate for term limits of 8 years. I do see the value of institutional knowledge that long-term members serve, but they could continue to mentor people without being on boards, and I think that they should be encouraged to do so. I think the terms should be uniform on the Planning Commission. I think there are 4-year terms and 6-year terms, or just different terms, and those should be uniform. I think that the rules concerning members who have not met the requirements of attending 75% of the meetings, I think there should be consequences. It shouldn't just be like, hey, you didn't attend enough meetings. Like, actually, they should no longer be on the board or commission. Just like going through my grocery list, sorry. With additional vacancies, I think in the middle of the year, I think there should be a whole new application process. You could take the applications from the last round and then solicit new applications. And I think especially for the Planning Commission, it should be a whole council discussion of that. And I agree with Susan's point about the relationship between the boards and commissions and city council. For example, recently there was an item that Open Space Board had unanimously denied or recommended denial towards, but that it was on the consent agenda. And I feel like that, I think that's an oversight. I just think that there should be more discussion and thought on the dais about what recommending boards are saying and really take their views seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh Cooperman?
Hi, Josh Cooperman, 216 Griffith Street. I serve on the Sustainability Advisory Board for the past 2 years and a little bit, but I'm just speaking as a private resident. I too would like to pick up on a couple of items that Susan and Sherry raised. So first of all, I also think it would be great if the boards could have a little bit more interaction with City Council. And then to pick up on one of Susan's ideas, I think in the appointment process, it would also be good to bring in input from each board's contact or on the staff, which I don't know if you have done that before, where you get input from the staff member who works with the board, but they would, I think, certainly be a good resource for giving you information. Then I'd just like to make 2 other comments sort of in the vein of adding more diversity to our boards. First of all, I'd like to note there was a letter, I don't know, probably a couple months ago now, from Helen Moshak, who is on the Open Space Board, about, I think mostly about interview processes. And I think it was mostly in regard to city council, but it certainly applies to interviewing candidates for the boards. And it had a whole bunch of ideas about how to make those interviews more equitable. And then the last comment I'd like to make, have been some discussions at various places in the community, again, around trying to get more diversity on our boards. And one idea which has been raised is to try to basically advertise positions on the boards more widely. And I just want to make one suggestion along those lines, which doesn't even have to necessarily do with diversifying the boards, but just in terms of getting the community some more information, which is that maybe each board, I don't know if it would be a duty, but maybe they should organize kind of a forum around the time when applications are due. And that way people could come and talk to people who are board members and find out what it's like to be on the board. And just learn about that kind of information. So yeah, I don't know if that should necessarily be a duty of each board, but maybe. It seems like a good enough idea to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Is there anybody on Zoom who'd like to make a comment?
It's not working for me either.
So I don't see any hands up. All right. Thank you, everybody, for the public comment. So this is a discussion item for us. And as the city clerk said, we're looking to answer those questions in a way that we can give staff direction to do some work. And so one question I had, because one of your questions is really talking about the boards that we have. Should we combine some? Should we eliminate? We can have that discussion. So we have the Open Space Advisory Board. Can that be combined with another board?
No, that one is required in the charter.
All right.
So you could add additional duties to it, I suppose, but the duties designated in the charter couldn't be changed.
Okay, so for example, we have an open space parks tax, and that has split responsibility for administration, or at least advisory capacity. Could we add parks into the open space realm of definition based upon the charter?
I think the city attorney and I would have to look at that and see what the options are.
I agree. I'd like a chance to look into that, but
Okay.
It's conceivable that we could combine other boards into the OSAB board and expand
The
their
scope.
role. Right.
Okay.
Because then we would still be meeting the requirements of the charter, but I don't want to give an off-the-cuff answer to that without really
and I was
looking
just-
at it.
I was really teeing that up as, something that I'd like to know.
Sure.
Because, we have this awkwardness of we have this combined tax and we have separate organizations, and so it's just something to consider. Other discussion items, Councilor Most, and then Councilor Lay?
I'm just very excited that we're discussing this, because I think this is really important, and I think it really speaks to our commitment to DEI, and I'm really glad our new DEI director is here with us, and I hope that she's going to take a significant role in helping us, staff, council, really do better and be better and use industry standards. So I guess for me, I kind of see this as three sort of pieces, which is sort of the recruitment, application, appointment process. And I guess what I would suggest and ask is that, we have an HR department, we have our new EDI director or DEI director, depending on what order the words going, but it seems to me that we have some best practices within our organization already, which I'm sure that we're looking at and trying to make even more equitable and expand, diversity within the city. So I would I guess what I would like to see is the experts that we already have in our HR department and our, director of, DI director, tell us what the recruitment process ought to look like and what the application process ought to look like that aligns with sort of best practices as they are today. I guess because I'm certainly not an expert. I mean, I think Helen Moshak's letter, Josh pointed to, I think that was really informative for me because I don't know anything about this. So I would really love to see the experts that we already have in our city staff take a pass at that. And I guess I would kind of, on some level, kind of want to understand. I mean, I think we should talk about maybe mixing some of these boards or condensing whatever. But again, I'd kind of like to understand what the impact is on our staff to these boards right now, like how many hours they are spending doing this and how productive they feel the boards and commissions are and their participation in them. And again, to me, I mean, we can talk about that and that's great, but I think they're the ones that actually have, I think, data that's really useful and important. And I guess the same thing when I think about term limits and adjusting these terms. Like one of the things that makes me bananas is the fact that, like Sherry brought this up with the Planning Commission. There's 1-year terms, there's 2-year terms, there's 3-year terms, there's 4-year terms, there's 5-year terms. We have terms on certain boards are different and they're kind of all over the map. And I'm a big supporter of term limits because I believe that continually bringing in new people and fresh ideas is important. And I guess my perspective on these boards and commissions, and maybe I'm just alone in this, is that this is not an opportunity for us necessarily to go seek expertise in these particular areas. This is an opportunity for community service. This is an opportunity for citizens to engage in their community. And the reason why we have staff experts on these boards and commissions is because they're the experts. And they should retain a lot of that, quote, institutional knowledge. I hate that expression. But, that they have the context and they provide some of that expertise, with the exception of the one board we have, which is the Building Code Appeals Board, which I think you have to have specific expertise. I don't see any of our boards and commissions as requiring any particular expertise. I think it requires enthusiasm, commitment, intellectual curiosity, the willingness to do the work. So I guess I'd kind of like to see, we obviously have discussion, but I'd really like to put this back on staff and say, how should this work following best practices for these sort of things? And how would it be consistent with what we do in the state of Colorado, where we have really strict term limits for elected officials, right? I mean, I think I would really like to kind of get some of that from the experts that we have in-house that know a lot more about this than we do.
Councilor Lay?
Yeah, these are just a couple of thoughts that I had about boards and commissions generally. I mean, because I've heard, and I think a lot of us are hearing from people on boards and commissions these days. I've heard a lot of frustration, and I wanted to just make sure to at least pass on the concerns that I have heard. I mean, one of them is the lack of contact. Josh mentioned that, I think. Others have mentioned it, that people feel like they just don't have enough contact. If they're advisory, well, where is that advice opportunity? We know that we've gotten some letters tonight. That's one way to provide advice, but it's not the only way. And I think there's some hunger or interest in that. I think there is some concern about a lack of clarity on as to what the boards and commissions actually are supposed to do, what their deliverables are, what council expects and when. One question that I heard today was, hey, are we supposed to be kind of reflecting your views back to you, and are we kind of gathering information from the community on things that you are thinking, or are we supposed to be thinking independently? about things. And I said, I thought you're supposed to think independently, not because the way he characterized it was, is this an echo chamber? I said, no, that's not the intention. I think another thing that I've heard is, what is the importance of expertise and experience? If we're asking about it on our applications, we must value it. If it's not very important, then maybe we shouldn't be asking about it. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe that's kind of raising expectations that's critical to us. I have my own views about that. I think it's very important. And in some cases, in some boards and commissions, it's critical. And it's not just the ones where we do have some need for expertise, like the Building Code Board of Appeals or Historic Preservation, where there are some requirements. And, LRC has some requirements in terms of that as well. But I think, we don't want to mislead people. I think there is a sense among some of the people that I've talked to that we've misled people. That we've kind of brought them into a place and where they're spending their time and their energy and they're putting in huge numbers of hours, and that we're not listening to them, or we're not letting them do really what they believe they want or they were called to do. And one of the, I don't want to call out specific ones, I think we can talk about this. I think it's good to listen. I think one of the things that I hope is that this process will be a good one to listen to people who are on current boards and commissions say what their experiences have been in this. I'm just being very general in what I've heard. But they're going to have, I think this is a situation where you're going to have people who will tell you plenty. And that's a good thing. And learning why people leave. We've had some boards and commissions where people have left. We have some boards and commissions where people threaten to leave as a group. We had one of those not a couple of months ago like that. And I don't think they left, but I do think there were disconnects between what we're seeking in that process and what we're either getting or what people perceive they're supposed to be doing. And I think the other part of it that we need to think about, a lot of this clarity and all that falls on us. That's us. That's not anything else. We ought to be clear with people. And there are amazing people in our community. And they're amazing people that we're not going after. They're amazing people who just don't know, that we haven't touched. And I agree with Councilmember Most. The prospects for advancing EDI efforts are huge here. And I don't know how to do that. I've tried different ways, and I think others have. And we've gotten input, but I think it's probably more anecdotal than it is systemic. And so frankly, one of the things I was going to ask is if Monet had any ideas she wanted to share with us tonight, but I'm not going to put her on the spot like that. She can, you guys can come up with stuff. But I hope that what we do strengthens all that. Term limits are hard. I don't have any I guess, objection to them in principle, but I think in some areas, they're a problem. I think on Planning Commission, it's really, having been on Planning Commission, it is a hard thing to learn without some time. It really is. It's not something you just jump into and can absorb things. I think it's just a harder one. So I think there's a benefit, and I think there's a benefit for having different levels of commitment in terms of years. So there's reasons why there are graduated terms there, and I don't know whether there's a limit. I know the outer limit probably won't ever be exceeded again on planning commission, but that person who served I think 23 years, I don't know that there was a lot of competition in the early days, but served very well and with distinction. And some others may be a little better. The other thing is, I think it'd be great to have like a fair or something where you have a whole bunch of people. I like that idea. And that people could just learn about them. Because as it is, people learn from one another and maybe their neighbors and stuff, but that's not very systemic. You know, you're not gonna get necessarily a lot of diversity out of that. And so, but one person said today, though, that they wanted to know, this BIPOC person who said, you know, I want to know why I wasn't selected for this. And that's kind of interesting too. It's, you know, we see who was selected. Well, why wasn't I selected? What can I do to get selected the next time? I thought that was pretty cool. And then if they learn, I mean, this person said, I'd sure like to be able to say, okay, I'm not willing to do that or whatever. But I know somebody who would be perfect for that. And doing some of that downloading, I think is, you know, potentially, I hadn't thought of that. And I'm sure, you know, it's another way of trying to get people here and doing it. So those are, you know, I think trying to figure out what we want to do with these boards and commissions. We ought to have some, it seems to me we ought to have some uniformity about how we set certain things up in terms of, you know, how that we do a charge for each one of them that's not already required under a charter or whatever, that we explain to them what we expect. You know, we do some reviews. I do. I think we all say, gee, how many meetings did that person miss? They want to come back on the board and they've missed a third of the meetings. I mean, we do that. We've done that in the past, but is there a reason for maybe getting more input or more formal input? But being uniform, I think, could be helpful because there's lessons to be learned. But I think most importantly, on our end, we got to figure out what we want and what we'd like to make clear, and we should make clear to the people who are doing this, and then we should go and listen to the problems that I just included a few, but there are probably others. And I don't know whether others' experiences are different than mine on council, but that's what I'm hearing.
Thank you. So next up will be Councilor Dickinson, and then me, and then I believe Mayor Pro Tem would like to make some comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is kind of, I am excited for you to try to figure out how to wrangle us into direction on each one, because there's so many things to talk about, right? And I really appreciate the comments of my council members went before me. I'll try to stay sort of narrow, but again, I think you have a challenge in front of you, Mayor. On consolidating, you know, I would be interested in consolidating PPLAB and the Rec Advisory Board. I think that those two could be one board. And again, look forward to staff on, could it just be that one is absorbed into the other, or should it be that we add them together and we have a big group for a little while and then it decreases over time? Could it be a whole new appointment of X number of people and anyone can apply for it, but they're like, those two are disbanded and a new one? I don't know. That's, I think, that's complicated, but I would be interested in those two being combined. I think the LRC, LSAB, and Youth Advisory Board need to stand on their own as they are. I'm interested in the licensing authority maybe being put into administrative judge. If that's, I think that'd be an interesting thing to look into if that's not necessary for the community to sit on that committee. And then, you know, the LCC Historic Commission, not the Historic Preservation Commission, but the Historic Commission or Historical Commission, and the Library Board of Trustees, you know, I think it's interesting, the concept of bringing those three together. I feel like, man, that'd be really difficult. I think it's maybe good that they're separate. Maybe I could see the Historical Commission and the Library Board of Trustees coming together. as one and the Cultural Council staying on its own. I just think there's so much work for the Cultural Council to be doing, and cooperating with those other committees would be amazing. But my sense would be put the Historical Commission and the Library Board of Trustees together. Those would be my, hopefully that's summed up easily enough for staff. As far as appointment, recruitment, I really agree. I like what Councilmember Most was talking about with, really focusing, letting staff direct us on what is a better recruitment strategy, what is a better application interview process, how should we do this a little differently to make this a little better, and then taking those recommendations for, I think a large part of that is about adding diversity of opinion and experience, lived experience and what have you. But I think also it's about making sure people know about it. I mean, that boards and commission fair sounds like a great idea. You can imagine at least like 9, if not 15 tables of the chairs of each, board and commission explaining like, hey, this is what we do. This is how we do it. This is, the commitment. This is what we're looking for in the board in general with expertise or knowledge or interest. This is a working board. This isn't, right? They're definitely different pieces. I think that's a great idea to kind of foster some understanding and look around and like interview, if you will, the 3 or 4 boards you might be interested in, get more information and maybe decide where you want to apply. As far as term limits, I think it's really tricky. I think I'd be willing to go either way. My sense is that we don't need term limits for boards and commissions because one, they still have to be reappointed. It's not like they just get to continue. And I think council has the opportunity, right, to not re-up someone, to say, thank you so much for your 8 years of service. We have a lot of interested people and we'd like to see some turnover here. Or to look and say, wow, we have 7 members that have been on this board less than a year. We really don't want this person who's been on 8 years to go. If they want to stay, we could really use this variety of experience. I think it's really problematic when you have the same people over and over and over. So if we notice a board has no new life in it, that's a problem. If we have noticed a board only has new life in it, that's also a problem. So by doing a term limit, you might accidentally get rid of someone that's doing a wonderful job and should be on there. But again, Maxine's point, EDI work will tell you that make sure there are term limits. Make sure there's a forced turnover. And I think if that puts us to too few members on a board, where like, wow, we only have 6, we need 7, and we have a 7th that's just off to the term limits, well, then we have a vacancy, and maybe the term limit doesn't apply when there's a vacancy. Now they've been off, and they can be appointed to that vacancy. So you might be able to solve it a little bit that way if there's truly a vacancy due to term limits. So, well, you just got to hang on, and then once we've finished the process and there's a vacancy, we can reappoint you, and it's a new term. So maybe there are ways to get around that, but I'd be interested in hearing more from my colleagues and staff around the pros and cons of the term limits. I think Chris made a really good point about lengths of terms. I sort of agree with what I heard of like, oh my God, can we just have consistent terms? But it's a lot to ask someone to volunteer 4 years of their time to serve on a board. And again, when you're talking about filling these boards, it can be a little bit more palatable, a little bit better for entry, even for EDI work, like to say, hey, listen, it's just 2 years. We'd love to have you get on it. If you like it and you'd like to continue, you can for another 2, or maybe you can up it to 4. But I think that that's the purpose of those variety of lengths, is really just to try to get some people to commit when they're not maybe willing to commit to a 4-year appointment. Board duties, I think we have some good pieces here, but to the points that other people have made, and this is where trying to constrain us, Mayor, is difficult. The communication is a major issue. The connectivity or lack thereof of both council with committees, boards and committees, but also boards and committees with each other and their inner overlapping work needs to be worked on. This is a problem. We are hearing time and time again from all sorts of different boards and commissions a feeling of like disenchantment and not feeling like they are a part of the process. And I don't want to go back too far in the future, but I know one of the complaints from Brad was, you don't assign anything to us. So we're these experts in business retention development. You don't assign any tasks to us. And so we make our own agenda and our own plans, we look at things and we bring it, and you don't ask for our opinion on those things. So what are we doing here? We're out on this island, kind of doing our own work, and we're not connected in any way. And that board dissolved, or we dissolved it. But I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from several different boards and commissions of like, so we're just out here doing this thing. Do you even care? And so we got to fix that, but that's not even really part of the consideration tonight. We're talking about consolidating duties and how to do appointments. But gosh, how do we get better connected? How do we do that? And I think that's maybe the biggest issue behind all of this is how do we do a better job connecting? So hopefully those things are succinct enough, and I'll keep listening in. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Dickinson, and thank you for the confidence that I'm going to be able to wrangle this issue. You know, it's interesting. First thing I want to do is I want to thank all those people who are on our boards and commissions. You know, they're all there for a purpose. They all applied. They went through the application process. Almost all of them show up for all the meetings. They contribute. We have an amazing city. You know, we have somewhere between 50 and 70 applications every year for a very limited number of board positions. And those are highly qualified, energetic people who care about their communities. So I want to thank them. You know, it's interesting that the feeling of disconnection between these boards and council really came about because in 2019, the decision was made that council would no longer be assigned boards and commissions. You know, if you take, how many are there, 11? Take 11, divide by 6 because the mayor didn't assign himself. So, you know, we would have 1 or 2 assignments for these kind of things, and, you know, we would go and they would report back. And so the point of that is not to beat that. Maybe the idea might have had some merit at the time, but every year, we re-engineer what the boards and commissions are or what the purpose is, and that we're at that point now. And I'm glad we're at this point, and I'm glad we're not just doing a one-off. But, you know, what I'm hearing, and I think what we hear from the boards and commissions is there's really not a clear mission and purpose. I think we need to look at each of those which are articulated in our document here. I don't want to rewrite them tonight, but I think staff, because we have different staff working with each of the boards and commissions, and I'm not talking about the ones that are here that are based upon, you know, charter responsibilities, because those are already articulated in our code, but, you know, the other 7 or whatever the number is, because they get, like the rec board got created at a point in time because council, when we were opening the new rec center, felt like there needed to be more input from the community, and we would do that by using a rec board. And some of these have had a life since then that's really beyond the initial purpose. So we start talking about, as Councilor Dickens suggested, should we combine the rec and the Parks Board, or I think that's what you said, Parks and Landscaping. Yeah, I think we should look at those things, and we should make some tough decisions. We got to remember we impact people when we do this. We impact people who are members of these boards, and we'll need to be very cognizant of that. But I also think it's our responsibility to do that. But once we have a clear mission and purpose, then we have to agree upon what that is. And we have to agree that that's it going forward. Now, future councils may change that because needs will change over time. The other thing, and you know, being a financial person, I always look for the return on investment. If we're asking a group of people and staff to spend time, what is the benefit to the community? And so we need to articulate that as well. We don't want to create a board and say, well, go figure out something you're going to do, and then no one's going to listen to you. And, you know, honestly, I think that's where we're at. Because I don't know about anybody else, and I do give some of you a lot of credit for going to board meetings, but there's not a lot of connection, and there needs to be connection. These are our boards and commissions, and unless they have a intended purpose, then it's disingenuous of us to ask them to meet and work without something that's really going to benefit the community. So, I mean, that's what I call return on investment. You know, but as far as doing consolidations, I do think if you take a look at the organizational charts, you know, Cultural Council, Historic Commission, and Library, if you take the staff components of those, they're under a director. And they do have interlinkings from a staff perspective. So that would be one. I know Cultural Council works on very special things, but the other ones do as well. But we could have a combined committee there, I think, that would really mirror the staff's perspective. Parks and Public Landscaping and the Rec Board should be considered. But each of these needs to have a defined purpose. We need to agree upon that purpose, and we need to decide if we're doing the best for the community by having that board or commission. So I think the Mayor Pro Tem had some comments.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I agree with the comments that have already been made. I will say, I was on the Historic Preservation Commission, which does have very specific requirements for some of the members, not all. But at the same time, I was attending other advisory board meetings, like the Sustainability Advisory Board meeting and things, just because I was very interested in what was going on. I continue to go to those meetings because there's something about the personal interaction, the hearing people speak, seeing the other members' reactions to what a fellow member is saying. The interactions that happen at one of those meetings can't be summarized in a report to council. And so going there and seeing how they came up with their recommendations just makes a lot of sense to me. We used to have the liaison. Every board had a liaison from council. And that, as the mayor said, that was abolished. We were going to, instead of that, have biannual dinners with each of the board and all of council, but then COVID came, so that didn't happen. Something like that, I think, has to come back. We have to have some kind of interaction between the councils and the council and the advisory councils outside of a formal board meeting with no topics other than what's going on with you guys. Talking about consolidating the boards, I agree with the mayor that the Cultural Council, Historic Commission, and Library Board of Trustees are all under one director. I think it makes sense to combine those three. And also the, what would be Parks and Public Landscaping and the Rec Advisory Board? They use the same properties, they do the same things. I guess it would be Public Landscaping and Rec Advisory Board, and Parks could go to open space since they have the tax money and things that they need to deal with. And then the Rec and Public Landscaping can deal with pickleball courts and tennis courts, right? Then on defining the roles, I think it's really important that each of the boards knows what their role is, what their function is, that they are advisory boards, and we, we're the decision makers, I guess, at the end. But what we expect them to be looking at and recommending to us. So that they know why they're there, what they're supposed to be doing in order to help the city. And then they can tell us, no, we can't do that. Or maybe you should give that duty to the other board or something like that. In recruitment options, I would love to see it be more public, more open, so we get a greater variety of people. And as someone mentioned, I think it was Maxine, I'm hoping that Monet helps with that. And then term limits, I'm not a big fan of term limits. They said, there are some times when you want that person there that's been there for 12 years and knows the history and knows the process and maybe has some inside information that someone new does not. On the other hand, we do want new blood. So changing up, but that can be done in the reappointment process. When the term limit is up, you reappoint, or maybe you don't reappoint based on conversations that we've had with the other board members that say, no, that person never shows up, or they don't know what they're doing. Then we don't reappoint them. We find someone new to step in. So those are my recommendations, and I would like to see the city come back with their recommendations for how you think that would best serve the council, the city, and the boards.
Councilor Hefner.
Yeah, thanks. I think those were all really good points. I'm going to try and hit just a few of them quickly. On term limits, I think we either need term limits or some more meaningful feedback process from within the boards and commissions on performance and how performance is. I know we have a lot of really dedicated folks on board and commissions, and that's not a dig at them. I don't think it should be keeping score, but I think there should be an opportunity for some kind of candid, anonymous feedback on are folks contributing? Are they coming prepared to meetings? Right now, I think the only real metric that we get is attendance, and I'm not sure that gives us, it's better than nothing, but I don't know how meaningful that is. And I think if we have sufficient information as to performance, it reduces the need for term limits because we'll have a better idea of how folks are contributing on a particular board. I also agree on the need for interaction. I thought the dinner idea is a nice one. I'm thoughtful that reducing the total number of boards will create more opportunities for meaningful interaction with maybe a smaller number total. I mean, right now with the list we have, that would be a lot of dinners. Twice a year, that would be a lot of dinners. And just, being realistic about how do you balance I think it's terrific. We have so many people who want to volunteer and spend their time helping the city. And I was on Planning Commission for a number of years. I really enjoyed it. I found it meaningful. I met other interesting people who were also involved in the city. It made me interested in this. I think they are an important sort of pipeline to civic engagement, and finding those opportunities are really important, but they have to be meaningful opportunities. I also agreed with Councilmember Lay's point about trying to systematize somewhat the process for sharing information about boards and soliciting applications. I think right now it goes out in the water bill. That's where I get it. And maybe, I'd love to see some creative ideas about how else we might share that. The board fair is sort of an interesting idea. On the local licensing authority, I'm actually going to disagree, I think, just a little bit with Councilor Dickinson, that I sort of think that makes sense as a board. I think that's more of a policy decision in a lot of ways than something that we'd want to hire out to a sort of, whether it's a municipal judge or a different judge or the city attorney sitting as a judge. It makes sense to me to either have a board or this body consider those as important policy decisions rather than treating it more like a technical type of application. And I think those are all the additional thoughts I had to share, but I'm really looking forward to what you come back to us with after the mayor summarizes everything that's been said.
Wrangle, I think, is what Councilor Dickinson said. Councilor Hamilton.
Let me add a few more thoughts for you to wrangle. How about that? So as far as consolidating boards, I think you've got some ideas. I think that for me is really going to inform the second bullet point regarding board duties it's hard to answer that question right now without knowing what the proposed consolidation or new structure is. There's a couple points regarding to the appointment process that I want to make. And I do think Monet and HR is going to be key to this process and helping us to ensure that it is a fair and equitable process, soup to nuts, beginning to end. I want to throw a few ideas, not ideas, but bring to the table some thoughts regarding term limits and length. I think it is very important that we have a clear process in place and expectation for term limits and lengths. Once we leave it up to individuals to decide on a single person, that's when you can introduce biases into the process. So I think upfront, it has to be clear. We can maybe have, if there's not 50 applicants in a year and there's an open seat, maybe there's something we can write into this process that allows interim coverage or something of that sort. But leaving the terms up to individuals to judge and make decisions on based on a single person, I have a really hard time supporting that. The term institutional knowledge has been thrown out quite a few times. I also don't believe institutional knowledge should be the reason to not have terms and lengths. If institutional knowledge is the reason someone should stay on a board, that's a systematic problem to me. There should be other systems in place where that knowledge can be accessed by every single member on that board. It shouldn't be a single person holding it. As a leader in biotech, I prepare my team that the ship will stay afloat if something happens to me. It doesn't all rely on me to keep it moving forward. And I think we should hold the same with our boards and commissions. As far as expertise goes, I understand that some boards and commissions require expertise. Those that don't put it on the application. We are not experts in every decision that we make up here. But we have the passion to learn and represent our community. So if it's not required, I say we take it off because it could discourage people from even considering applying. Let me make sure I don't have anything else there. Yeah, those are my main points. Thank you.
Counselor Dickinson.
Thank you. I really appreciate those points, Barbara. I think the one piece about taking off that question though is, are we still going to be looking at it? You know, it's like, well, it's not a question, but this person told us all about their expertise in this field, and so we're like, oh, I love that, and someone else is like, oh, I didn't realize that was important to you. So I think if their expertise is important to us, then it's kind of hard not to have that be a question. I don't really have a solution. That for me, I was like, oh, it's going to be a little weird though, because we don't ask that question and we care about the answer. Are we doing it the right way? But the reason I raised my hand was actually, I think it'd be interesting, Mayor, if we went back to a liaison approach and say I was the liaison for two of these boards and commissions. That when we get to the next year and we're doing, this first round of reviewing applications, it would be my responsibility to review the preliminary applications of the boards that I'm the liaison for, maybe with another council member, something like that. But to split that work that way, like, well, I've been at the meetings, I've seen what people have done, I've seen their commitment level, I've seen their preparation, I'm the one at that meeting. So I'm a great person to then evaluate, someone who's reapplying or someone who's, been doing it for 4 years or 8 years, what have you. And it's just part of the process, right? It's not the final say on who we select, but I've been on that committee where I'm looking at all 15 boards and trying to narrow it down to a smaller group of people to look into and interview potentially. And so, maybe that would be, right now it wouldn't really, we could split that work up among more people, but again, there's going to be no knowledge. Like, well, I haven't been to, a PPLAB meeting, so I don't really have any information beyond these applications. So that could be a nice way to have some better knowledge of the process when we're going through new applications. So just an idea. I don't know how strongly you're thinking about returning to a liaison system versus not, but I'd be well, let me say, I would be in support of the council liaison concept again, because I think we need to change something. We didn't have this many complaints then that we do now, and that is something that has definitely changed in between those two moments. So I would say that would be an improvement.
Thank you. Got two hands up, Councilor Most. And after these two comments, I'm going to try to summarize.
Okay, I just want to revisit this expertise issue again. I can't tell you how many times in my career I was told I didn't have the expertise I needed to get a promotion or get the job. I ended up basically becoming a consultant because I got tired of people telling me what I could and couldn't do. And basically what I found is I'm at my best when I'm doing something I don't know anything about. I've never done it before. I just want to read something I wrote this afternoon to someone. In my 35-year career in high tech, I found that often the most creative, innovative, and compelling strategic problem solving happens by including folks not deeply immersed in a particular issue who come to the table without preconceived notions. These non-experts intuitively think outside the box because they don't see the box. We have incredibly qualified staff to provide expertise. I really think we need to get serious about understanding what we think this expertise is, because what we're doing is excluding people that could be powerful contributors to these boards and commissions, that have ideas nobody's even thought of, that are looking at it in a completely different way. And I just think it's really critical. And I think this is something that is used to basically, it's kind of an experience trap in a way that some people never get out of. We should be providing opportunities for people in our community to have these leadership positions, to have these experiences, not just to contribute to our community, but to give them opportunities to develop these skills that they can then apply in public service, not just here, also in their careers and so on and so forth. So I feel really, really strongly about that. And the one other point I wanted to make is particularly around the merging of the library, the historical commission, and the cultural council. Right now, the way the cultural council is constituted is a problem because it's this like heavily working board and commission. And even prior to that, the comments you made, I think that they should not be a working board and commission. I think they should be like the rest of the boards and commissions. And if they're gonna design and create cultural activities and experiences, then the staff events folks should be implementing them. I don't think we need a board and commission that is out with a level of required service that is way beyond anything else that anyone else is going to do.
Councilor Lay.
There are a couple of points I wanted to make about this. I cannot overstate the need to talk to the boards and commissions and listen to what they have to say. Many of the boards and commissions have on them people who have dedicated many years and sometimes tours of duty, multiple tours of duty on those committees. And I am concerned when I hear what we've said tonight that we are going to thoroughly devalue the contributions of those folks if we go in too quickly with the idea of consolidating and so forth. Particularly, I think there's good ideas. I'm not quarreling with the ideas. I think that it's worthwhile to listen to our residents because they're the ones that are serving. I don't think necessarily they drive the decisions we're going to make about this, but I think we would do well not to devalue that by, I don't know, with coming in with sort of a sense that we're going to do this. What do you think about that? I think there's a danger in that. I think the other thing is we I like the idea of return on investment. That's a good thing. But remember, from the user's point of view, or these members of the boards and commissions that we have, they have a desire for evaluating their own return on investment. Is this something that I'm going to do? Is it going to be meaningful and worthwhile? And we need to give them worthwhile, meaningful work to do. And we need to be thinking about that. And that's not just it's not just a sort of what we demand. They have demands too about this. And I know that there are some who've said to me, look, I thought I was supposed to be doing this. I did this. We presented something for council to look at. They entirely ignored it. And I wouldn't be serving on this board commission had I not done this. And that particular instance that I'm thinking about was a disconnect between what their actual charge was and what they were doing. I think they had a sense that this was a part of what their job was, when it wasn't clear, at least from the ordinance, that that was part of their charge. And it's, there's a need for more communication. We have, over many years, this is just my experience, and I think it's probably the experience of most of you who've gone through these interviews and stuff, I just sit back and I go, how did we get this embarrassment of riches in front of us? This is just ridiculous. We had one time, I remember we had a PhD in the subject matter of the commission that we were working on. I'm just sitting there going, they want to do that in their spare time for the city free. Wow, that's incredible. And some of the people at this dais are in that situation, having done that before. So maybe it's just I think we have a challenging situation because we've got something of a revolt. I don't think that's too much of a word to describe some of the concerns that we've got in the field. And I don't want to further alienate people than we may have. I really want that to be a careful process. We can upend everything, and that's fine. That may be what we end up doing. Maybe a good idea to and I'm not suggesting that we do everything just because we did it before, but I'm confident in staff being able to address those issues without creating, potentially a bigger problem. Because if we do consolidate, are we going to end up with fewer positions, more competition, for among the people? That's going to be something that people are going to be concerned about, because there are people who want to be involved. And is that going to serve the thing that Councilmember Mose was talking about, of getting people involved? And so anyway, I hope that I guess I'm concerned because I just have heard enough from people to say, you're on a thin edge, you're kind of on thin ice with us. You're on thin ice with us as board and commission members. And I kind of took that sort of seriously, not we dictate everything. There's going to be a cost if we cut back the number, the size, the charter, the deliverables, the contact between those and us. And there's impact on us and them and the community because of that.
Thank you. So let's go back to the questions. So I guess this is both for the city manager and the city clerk. Are there boards you are interested in consolidating, sunsetting, or changing? I think you've heard a few things. So the one question I brought up was, can the Open Space Advisory Board include parks? So that would be one thing. There was discussion about combining Cultural Council, Historical Commission, and the library. So, I think what we're looking for is some response back of, does this make sense? What are the pros and cons? But let me pause for a second. We have 2 more meetings about this scheduled. So May the 2nd is another direction discussion meeting. So what we're looking for is for that meeting, you will bring ideas back that we could further discuss. At that point, we would give more solid direction. And then we were also scheduled for July 25th. If we're going to make changes, we would make them at that time. So we have process in place, and I think that's important. And when we also talked about the public landscaping and rec being combined, or park. I don't know how we parse parks in 2 places, but you'll help us with that, right? Okay. The other thing, I guess it's the next question, are there changes to the board duties council would like to see? We could use help on that. I don't want us to edit the mission statements from up here, but I think it's important that we have clear mission, and that to answer some of the questions we've had from comments on the dais here is really what is the purpose and what are we asking them to do? I agree with Councilor Lay that people want to be engaged and they want to feel like they're doing something that's of benefit to the city. And if that's a measurable in whatever shape or form, I think that's really important. The idea of the liaison, I think there were some boards where that was very useful and other ones I'm not sure. But I think we need to do something that connects council more effectively with the boards and commissions. Some of them that have a defined purpose, maybe less so. I don't know if the Board of Adjustments really wants a member of council sitting there. They're a quasi-judicial.
Mayor, can I make a comment for that exact reason? When we had liaisons before, the quasi-judicial boards did not have a council liaison.
All right, so
there's very specific reasons we don't want you guys going to.
Right, so Board of
listen to planning.
Adjustments, Court of Appeals, and Planning Commission. So those 3 specifically. What about Historic Preservation
They're a
Commission? That would be the
quasi-judicial board
same.
as well.
Right. So those 4. Right. So we absolutely wouldn't want somebody there. But the other ones, it might be very helpful to do that. I think the idea of having the dinners was interesting, but as was mentioned, so we'd be doing 20 dinners a year, and I don't know if we have enough time for that. We're actually not doing public comment. I'm sorry, that's just procedure.
We did like an end of the year party and had everybody come together. Like a holiday thing, that would be fun.
That would be a party and
Appreciation.
not a procedural thing we're doing to connect the boards, but
Well,
that's an idea.
We have done them before where we bring in
Right.
Parks and Open Space together on the same night, or LRC and Planning Commission on the same night. So you limit the number of evenings you guys have to do that.
Right, so the other thing was changes to the appointment process. So you've heard a lot of ideas. Do you need us to define it further, or can you take those ideas and propose something?
I think we can take it from there. I'll work with Monet and we can
That'd
work
be
on
good.
that. We have done the fair thing in the past. We did it for a number of years. I couldn't tell you why we stopped doing it, but there are quite a few things we can look at and bring you some suggestions.
Yeah, so the first year I got on council, we did speed dating, and I don't want to go back to that. So don't propose the 5-minute interviews. That didn't work at all. So it really was. It was 5-minute interviews, and right.
I will say too, we got to the expertise questions based on input from council, so I'm not going to ask you any input on the applications at this point.
Yeah, so I guess I want to make one comment just for clarity, Councilor Moss. I mean, we do have some of these boards where we have specific technical requirements for things. But it's interesting when, let's just take sustainability. I mean, we had a professor from CU who taught sustainability. It was hard not to want to include someone with that depth of knowledge that was willing to share their time and expertise. So I think it's a balance. But it's when you have somebody of that, international stature. I mean, that's.
I'm not saying we should exclude them. I'm just saying that it's not a requirement, I guess, when I think about it.
It's not a requirement for any of the other ones. We do ask about their professional background and how it relates to this particular board. And many times that's very helpful, so. And we can still decide whether or not it's the right selection.
Right, that's
So-
why I'd really like to have the, the people that have expertise and how do you recruit in a way that expands the pool, right?
Sure, I don't disagree with that sentiment. So did we give enough direction for the next meeting? Is there questions for council?
I have 2 pages of notes, which I don't usually do. And there's a handful of other ideas and suggestions in there that relate to what you went through. I think you covered about half of kind of the stuff that I was taking notes on, but it's all into the same kind of bucket. So I think we have some really good direction and ideas and inquiries as far as things you're looking to understand better or get some ideas on. And so I think we can get a team together and bring some good stuff back for you on May 2nd.
Is everybody nodding their head? All right, well, thank you, everybody. So that's the end of our agenda, so we are adjourned.
Nice job wrangling.
Hey guys, thanks for extending my birthday an extra 6 hours.